In Greek mythology, Poseidon emerged as one of the most influential gods of the ancient world. He belonged to the generation of the Olympians, the children of Cronus and Rhea, whose struggles shaped the early order of the cosmos. After the fall of the Titans, the three brothers, Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon, divided the world's domains. Zeus took the sky, Hades took the underworld, and Poseidon became the ruler of the seas, earthquakes, and storms. His character in myth reflects the realities of the Mediterranean world: unpredictable waters, shifting coastlines, and the constant presence of natural force in daily life. To the people of Greece, Poseidon was not merely a god of the ocean, but a power that influenced travel, trade, agriculture, and the stability of the land itself. Among them was Gaia, the earth herself, the patient mother of all. From her came the mountains, rivers, and the first great ocean, Pontus, the deep, primal water that encircled her. Beside Gaia stood Uranus, the sky, whose shimmering body arched over her in eternal embrace. From their union came the Titans, towering beings of elemental might, and among them the stern Cronus, destined to rule for a time. It was a world of raw beginnings, where thunder had not yet found its voice, and the waves slept in their ancient cradle. But deep within the vast potential of that early creation, the sea began to stir. In that stirring was something restless, something alive, a power that would one day take form as the god of the ocean itself. Cronus, fearful of prophecy, devoured his children as soon as they were born. The air trembled with the cries of Rhea, his wife, as each infant disappeared into the dark pit of his hunger. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, all swallowed whole by their father's dread. But Rhea, desperate and cunning, resolved that her next child would not share their fate. When the time came for her sixth birth, she fled to the island of Crete and brought forth her youngest son, Zeus. In secret, she hid him away in a mountain cave, replacing him in Cronus's hands with a stone swaddled in cloth. Cronus, blind with paranoia, devoured it as he had the others, unaware that one child of his blood still lived to challenge him. When Zeus grew strong enough, he forced his father to disgorge his swallowed siblings. One by one, the children of Cronus returned to light Hades from the underworld. Hera and Demeter radiant as dawn, Hestia serene and silent, and from the depths of Cronus's belly came one more child, the one who would rule the waters, Poseidon. He emerged not screaming but roaring, his very breath a storm. Even as an infant, his eyes mirrored the restless sea, blue-green depths flecked with lightning. The world around him seemed to shudder when he opened them. The Titans had ruled with stone and fire, but in Poseidon's veins ran motion, fluid and infinite. He was not meant for stillness. Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon, the three sons of Cronus, were unlike any beings before them. They were gods of balance and conflict, embodying sky, earth, and sea. Yet even in their unity, the seeds of division had been planted. The young Poseidon felt this from the beginning, an instinct that his realm would not be among the heavens or the depths of shadow, but in a place between, a world of constant change. The Titans watched as the new gods gathered strength. The air crackled with the energy of a storm waiting to break, and when it did, the heavens themselves split open in war. The Titanomachy, the war of the gods, was no battle of mortals. It was thunder and fire, and the crash of collapsing mountains. The earth bled rivers of molten stone. The ocean rose in towering waves that devoured entire coastlines. And in the midst of it all, Poseidon grew into his power. He discovered that he could feel the pulse of the sea as if it were his own heartbeat. Each surge of tide answered his will. Each crash of wave carried his anger. He fought not with the subtle cunning of Zeus, nor the cold calculation of Hades, but with a raw and furious grace. When the Titans cast down boulders the size of mountains, Poseidon met them with waves that shattered their force. When lightning scorched the sky, he struck from below with walls of water that swallowed armies whole. His fury was not blind, it was symphonic, precise, elemental. At his side fought the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants whose mastery of forge and flame would later shape his destiny. They hurled molten metal at the Titans, each blast lighting the horizon like dawn breaking through chaos. The Hecatoncheires, the hundred-handed ones, cast stones like meteors, their roar echoing Poseidon's own. 10 years the war raged. 10 years of thunder, of fire, of storms that reshaped the very world. When at last the Titans were overthrown, the sons of Cronus stood victorious. Zeus claimed the heavens, Hades took the underworld, and Poseidon, with a single nod, accepted the realm of the sea. It was not a concession but a coronation. The ocean was the blood of the earth, the mirror of the sky, the endless frontier that no god or mortal could ever truly conquer. Poseidon descended into its heart, and the waters welcomed him as their king. The world entered a new age. The Titans were bound in Tartarus, their cries swallowed by stone. The heavens glittered with the new order of Olympus. The land breathed under the rule of gods and men, and deep below, the sea stirred once more, no longer the silent abyss it had been before, but a living, sentient force under the dominion of its tempestuous master. Poseidon's first act as ruler of the deep was to walk upon its floor. His steps awakened movement where before there had been stillness. Coral grew in his wake, forests of colour unfurling across the seabed. Creatures long hidden in shadow lifted their luminous eyes to behold him. The whales sang for him, the dolphins leapt in spirals of joy, and the octopuses unfurled their long arms in reverent awe. He raised his palace from the ocean floor, a citadel of coral and gold, with columns shaped like waves frozen in mid-crest. Pearls the size of stars gleamed from the ceiling, and fish of every hue drifted through its shimmering halls. This was no mere fortress. It was a living organism, breathing in rhythm with the tides. From his throne, Poseidon surveyed his realm. Above him stretched the sunlit shallows, where sailors would one day pray for mercy. Below him lay the black trenches of the abyss, where no light had ever wandered. He could feel the pulse of every current, the whisper of every ripple. The ocean was his mind, his memory, his mood. Yet even in this majesty, there was restlessness. Poseidon was not a god of peace. He was the embodiment of movement of storms and tempests, of creation and destruction entwined. When he laughed, waves rolled across continents. When he frowned, the horizon darkened. When his temper rose, entire fleets vanished beneath the deep. The other gods came to visit him in those early days. Their curiosity mingled with awe. Even Zeus, master of the sky, seemed wary of the brother whose power ran beneath every shore. "The sea is yours," Zeus said once, gazing down from Olympus. "But remember, the sky feeds the storm that stirs your waves." Poseidon had smiled, a smile as calm as the surface of a sleeping ocean. "And the sea," he replied, "feeds the clouds that give you your thunder. We are bound, brother, forever." So began the reign of the god of the sea, not in solitude, but in rhythm with all creation. The tides became his breath, the storms his heartbeat. The mortals who would one day sail upon his domain had not yet been born, yet already their fates trembled within the roll of his waves. And far above, in the thin blue air of Olympus, the other gods listened to the murmur of the ocean and understood that Poseidon was not merely ruler of the sea, he was the sea itself, deep, unpredictable, and eternal, the birth of the storm child. Before the Olympian thunder, before the calm of the seas that sailors would one day cross, there was the cry of a newborn god, a sound that trembled through creation itself. Poseidon was not born into peace. He entered a world shrouded in fear, into a cosmos ruled by the shadow of his father, Cronus. His first cradle was chaos, and his first lullaby was the echo of devoured siblings. Cronus had long reigned as the master of time, swallowing his children the moment they emerged from Rhea's womb. Each infant, bright with divine potential, was consumed into the abyss of his body. ensuring no air could ever challenge him. But destiny, as always, is not so easily swallowed. When Poseidon's turn came, Rhea's trembling hands wrapped a stone in cloth, and the ruse saved the life of her youngest son, Zeus. But what of Poseidon? According to the old tellers, Poseidon was indeed born to the same fate as his siblings, swallowed whole into the darkness of Cronos's stomach, locked away in an eternal prison of silence and memory. There, in the endless dark, the god of the sea to be dreamed of waves he had never seen. Inside the prison of his father's body, Poseidon's spirit stirred like a tide waiting for the moon. He was not idle even in confinement. His essence moved, rippling through that unnatural womb, shaping within himself the rhythm of the ocean before the ocean existed. He was learning the pulse of existence, how chaos and stillness must dance together, and though he did not yet know it, this rhythm would become his eternal identity. When Zeus, his youngest brother, came of age and forced Cronos to disgorge his swallowed children, Poseidon burst forth in a torrent of divine force. He came not gasping for breath, but roaring, the sea itself breaking free from its cage. That moment marked not just his rebirth, but the awakening of the world's waters. It was said that when Poseidon drew his first true breath, rivers that had lain dormant began to run, and the primal seas surged with life for the first time. The earth, once still, began to hear the call of waves against its shores. Poseidon stood beside Zeus and Hades, three brothers forged in rebellion, each carrying the mark of their liberation. Zeus's eyes blazed with the fire of lightning, Hades's shadow carried the silence of tombs, but Poseidon's gaze reflected motion deep, shifting, and endless. He was the bridge between the worlds, not of sky nor soil, but of the infinite expanse that touched both. His very being was water mutable, powerful, and untamed. When the war with the Titans began, Poseidon was still learning what it meant to be free. The battlefield became his proving ground. He found himself drawn to the edges of combat, to the places where land met sea. From there he struck with his newfound strength, his hands shaping currents, his voice summoning rain and thunder. His enemies soon learned to dread the sound of rushing water. For wherever Poseidon walked, rivers rose and oceans boiled. He was a creature of duality, calm as a mirror when watching his allies gather strength, yet terrible in wrath when the Titans threatened his kin. At times he seemed to vanish entirely into the mist and foam, reappearing where the earth split and swallowed whole armies. His body was the sea's body everywhere and nowhere, a force rather than a form. The other gods began to whisper that he fought not with weapons, but with the will of nature itself. When the Titanomachy finally ended, Poseidon had learned something no other god fully understood, that power is not found in destruction alone, but in the endless motion between creation and ruin. Water, he realized, gives life and takes it in equal measure. From that understanding grew the calm in his storms, the balance in his fury. After victory, the three brothers stood upon the highest peak of Mount Olympus to divide the world among themselves. The air was thick with new silence, the kind that follows great wars and marks the beginning of history. Zeus cast lots for the heavens, Hades for the underworld. Poseidon's lot was the sea vast, unknowable, free of boundary. He accepted it with a nod that shook the mountain. Some said he smiled, though the expression was distant, as though he could already hear the call of the deep. When he descended into his domain for the first time, the world shifted. The ocean, which had been wild and formless, took shape under his command. He walked along the seabed, and coral bloomed in his footprints. Schools of fish spiraled around him like living jewels, recognizing their master by instinct. He extended his arms and felt the currents flow through his veins, cold, steady, eternal. The ocean whispered to him, speaking in languages older than the gods. It told him of hidden valleys beneath the waves, of mountains taller than Olympus itself buried under blue silence. It spoke of dark trenches where light had never dared to go, and of endless plains of sand that stretched farther than any mortal eye could see. In those moments, Poseidon knew he had not simply inherited a realm, he had become it. He built his palace in the heart of the Aegean, a fortress of translucent coral and marble, shimmering with light drawn from the surface. The Cyclopes, his old allies from the war, helped forge its gates and pillars. Jewels from the ocean floor adorned its halls. Within it grew forests of anemones and seaweed that glowed like lanterns, while dolphins played among fountains of silver spray. At its center stood his throne, carved from a single conch shell larger than a chariot, rimmed with pearls that pulsed faintly with his own divine rhythm. Here, Poseidon sat and listened to the heartbeat of the world. He could sense every ship that would one day sail above him, every storm that would brew beyond the horizon. The waves answered his moods, tranquil when he was pleased, furious when he was wronged. Yet even in his solitude, the god was not lonely. He was surrounded by the Nereids, gentle sea nymphs who danced like ripples around his throne, and by Triton, his herald, whose conch would one day sound across oceans as the call of the deep. Still, there was something unfulfilled within him, for though he ruled an infinite kingdom, Poseidon's nature was not to remain still. He longed for motion, for struggle, for the push and pull between sea and land. That longing became the rhythm of tides. Twice each day, the ocean reached toward the shore, stretching out as though yearning for the world above. And twice it retreated, remembering its own depths. This was Poseidon's breath, his eternal exhale and inhale, the heartbeat of creation. But even gods carry within them remnants of their origins. Poseidon could never entirely escape the shadow of Cronus's hunger, nor the taste of darkness from which he had been freed. At times, when storms raged without reason, mortals would say the sea god was remembering his imprisonment, that the fury of the waves was his rebellion against the confinement he once knew. When the sea calmed, it was said he was dreaming again of his mother, Rhea, and the gentle mercy that had given him life. From his palace, Poseidon looked upon the newly formed earth and sky. Zeus's lightning illuminated the clouds above, while Hades's underworld glowed faintly beneath. He could see the boundary of every realm, and he knew his was the only one that touched all others. Every river flowed to him, every drop of rain returned to him. The ocean was both beginning and end. In its vastness, he found both pride and melancholy, for he was a god without borders, yet also without rest. Time in the divine world has no measure. But even so, Poseidon began to feel the ages drift past him like currents. He shaped the first whales from the foam of his thoughts, sculpted dolphins from joy, and from his laughter created the spray of waves that mortals would one day call sea mist. Each act of creation filled him with fleeting peace, but it was never enough. He was a storm given flesh, always reaching, never still. When mortals eventually rose from the soil, learning to build, fish, and sail, they did not yet know his name, but they knew the sea's voice, the crash and murmur, the rhythm of their fear and their awe. It was Poseidon they heard in the night when waves struck their primitive rafts. Poseidon they prayed to when storms tore the horizon open. Long before temples or sacrifices, his worship was the oldest, the cry of a man staring into the endless blue and begging it to be kind. Poseidon listened. He was not cruel by nature, but neither was he merciful. He was balanced the eternal tide between gift and punishment. Those who respected the ocean found bounty and safe passage. Those who defied it found only ruin. And in that duality lay his divine truth, that even gods cannot be wholly gentle, nor wholly wrathful. From Cronus's prison, from the war of the heavens, from the division of the cosmos, all these moments shaped Poseidon into more than a being of power. They made him the embodiment of motion itself, the eternal reminder that nothing in existence remains still. He would go on to challenge gods, to love mortals, to bless and to curse. His story would ripple across centuries, across myth and memory, but it would always return to this beginning, the moment when a child of storm and silence opened his eyes for the first time and saw that the world itself was waiting for him to move. For in that instant, when the sea first stirred beneath the newborn god's touch, something profound was written into the fabric of creation, that the tides would forever mirror the heartbeat of Poseidon, rising, falling, eternal. War of the heavens and the sea. The heavens roared with lightning. The earth trembled under the weight of giants. The sea, which had only recently taken form, churned like a living creature awakening to rage. This was the Titanomachy, the war that would decide the fate of the cosmos, and Poseidon, newly freed from his father's stomach, took his place at the center of it. It was not merely a war of gods and monsters. It was the clash between order and chaos, between the old world and the new. The Titans ruled from Mount Othrys, their power immense and ancient, their voices carried like thunder across the mountains, their shadows stretching from horizon to horizon. Cronus, the devourer of his children, stood at their head, wielding the sickle that had once felled his own father, Uranus. His eyes were hard as bronze, unblinking as time itself. On the other side gathered the young gods, the Olympians still untested but burning with fury and the hunger for freedom. Zeus, their leader, stood at the highest point, lightning crackling in his grasp. Beside him was Hades, quiet and calculating, his dark cloak rippling like smoke. And between them stood Poseidon, his gaze set upon the horizon where sky and sea met in violent embrace. He was not yet the lord of the ocean, but already its pulse beat in his blood. For 10 long years, the war would rage, 10 years of thunder, flame, and storm. Poseidon's domain was the sea, but in those early battles, even the sea was a weapon of chaos. He summoned it with outstretched arms, waves towering as tall as mountains, sweeping away Titan strongholds. The water itself obeyed him, forming walls and spears and shields from foam and fury. Where his trident struck, the ground split, and rivers were born from the cracks. The Cyclopes, who had been imprisoned by the Titans, were freed by Zeus and gave gifts to the brothers in gratitude. For Zeus, they forged the thunderbolt, the weapon of kingship. For Hades, they crafted the helm of darkness, granting invisibility and terror. And for Poseidon, they forged the trident, a weapon unlike any other. 3 prongs of divine metal, each vibrating with the rhythm of the ocean's heart. When he held it aloft, storms answered his call. When he struck the earth, mountains crumbled, and the sea itself rose to obey him. The first time Poseidon tested it, the sky dimmed. He drove the trident into the ground, and from that wound burst geysers of boiling water that reached the clouds. Lightning wrapped itself around his weapon, and the thunder of waves drowned out the cries of the Titans. The balance of war had shifted. The brothers fought together, sky, sea, and underworld united against tyranny. Poseidon commanded the waves, his power spreading across every shore. He learned to read the rhythm of battle, as one reads the rhythm of tides, advancing and retreating in perfect measure. When the Titans' armies pushed forward, he swept them away in floods. When they faltered, he struck from below, shaking their foundations until their towers collapsed into ruin. But even for gods, war brings weariness. The skies were blackened with ash, and the world itself seemed to groan beneath the endless destruction. Oceans boiled, rivers changed their courses. Poseidon began to understand that their victory would not come through sheer strength, but through harmony, through balance among the brothers. Zeus's lightning could shatter the heavens, but without the waters to quench their fires, the world would burn. Hades could shroud enemies in darkness, but without Poseidon's floods to wash them away, the battle would stagnate. And so the god of the sea learned to move in rhythm with his kin. When Zeus's lightning struck, Poseidon followed with the crash of surf. When Hades sent shadows crawling across the battlefield, Poseidon called up mists from the ocean to hide their movements. Together, they became a storm unlike any seen before or since. The Titans fought fiercely, their strength seemingly endless. Oceanus, the ancient Titan of the waters, confronted Poseidon in battle, claiming the sea as his own. The two forces clashed beneath the horizon, their struggle shaking the very bed of the world. For 7 days and nights they fought, neither gaining advantage, until finally Poseidon's will broke through the old Titan's strength. "Your age has ended," he said, driving the trident downward. The sea shuddered, and Oceanus retreated into the farthest reaches of the deep, never to challenge him again. By the 10th year, even Cronus began to falter. His sickle dulled. His might, once eternal, began to wane. Zeus's bolts struck the heavens with relentless fury. Poseidon summoned a wave that rose higher than Olympus itself, carrying with it the echoes of all his rage. When it crashed upon the battlefield, it swept away the last defenses of the Titans. The war was over. The defeated were bound and cast into Tartarus, a pit so deep it rivaled the height of the sky. Poseidon himself helped seal the gates, using his trident to draw barriers of water and stone around the prison. The earth fell silent. The storm had passed. In that stillness, the brothers gathered. They had remade the cosmos, but who would rule it? It was Zeus who proposed the casting of lots to divide the realms equally. The sky would belong to Zeus, the underworld to Hades. Poseidon accepted the sea, not with envy but with a slow, knowing pride. For while the heavens were bound above and the underworld trapped below, the sea touched both. He would be the bridge between realms, his dominion vast and ever-moving. Poseidon descended from Olympus and stepped once more into the waves. As he did, the sea turned clear and alive, mirroring the god's mind. The fish swam closer. The coral began to glow. He looked out upon the horizon and felt a strange peace, a sensation foreign to him but comforting. He had fought not for vengeance, but for freedom, and the sea was freedom incarnate. Yet even peace carries its shadows. As he explored his realm, Poseidon began to sense its endlessness. It was a kingdom that could never be fully ruled, only guided. There were depths no light could reach, currents that moved beyond comprehension, creatures ancient even to him. It humbled the god who had fought titans. Here, he was both ruler and student, forever learning the ways of the waves. When storms rose upon the surface, Poseidon did not command them, he conversed with them. He listened to the wind's voice and the thunder's distant laughter. The balance of power that had won the war became the balance of nature itself. The ocean would rage, yes, but it would also cradle life. It would destroy, but also renew. In its duality, Poseidon saw himself a being of both peace and wrath, creation and ruin. His brothers returned to their own thrones, Zeus to Olympus, Hades to the shadows, and Poseidon, far below, found solace in solitude. He shaped his palace from coral and pearl, vast halls that shimmered like sunlight beneath the water. He filled them with songs, the calls of whales, the murmur of currents, the endless rhythm of the sea. His court formed around him. Nereus, the old sea god, wise and gentle. Amphitrite, the Nereid, whose grace would one day become his calm. Triton, his herald, whose conch shell would sound across oceans to announce the sea's will. The war had changed him. Poseidon was no longer the son of Cronus or the brother of Zeus. He was the ocean itself. The memories of battle, the cries of fallen titans, the thunder of collapsing mountains, all these became echoes within the waves. Mortals would later say that when the sea roars, it is the god remembering that ancient war, and when it falls silent, he is dreaming of peace. Above, Zeus's new empire shone with the light of justice and thunder. Below, Hades shaped the underworld into shadowed order. But it was Poseidon's realm that held the heart of balance, the eternal motion between above and below. Every drop of rain, every river, Every tear shed by a mortal found its way back to him. The cycle was complete. Thus, from the ruin of the Titans, the world was born anew. The sky, the earth, and the sea, three realms forever bound, forever in motion. And in the heart of that motion stood Poseidon, the storm child, who had fought the war of gods and found in victory the rhythm of eternity, dividing the cosmos. When the dust of war settled and the fires of Olympus had cooled to embers, the world lay in a quiet more profound than any silence before it. The Titans had fallen. The chaos that had ruled creation since the dawn was tamed, reshaped into balance by the hands of the victorious gods. From the summit of Mount Olympus, the sons of Cronus gazed upon the world they had remade, mountains still smoking, oceans steaming with the breath of battle, rivers carving new paths through scorched valleys. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for their decision. It was Zeus, bright with thunder, who first spoke. "Let us divide the cosmos as justice demands," he declared, his voice echoing through every valley. "No one god shall rule all things, lest tyranny return." His words crackled like lightning, and even the stones seemed to listen. Before them stretched the three realms, the sky vast and unending, the earth rich and wounded, and the sea deep and unfathomable. The brothers agreed that their rule must be shared, for though they were born of the same mother, they were not the same in spirit. Hades was grave and secretive, preferring the solitude of shadow. Zeus hungered for the heights, for order and law and dominion. Poseidon stood between them, neither of the air nor of the earth, but of the movement that connected all things. To decide their fate, they cast lots. 3 stones, smooth and heavy as destiny, were placed upon the altar. Each brother drew one, their choices unseen by mortal eyes. When the lots were revealed, Zeus had drawn the sky, Hades the underworld, and Poseidon the sea. There was no outcry, no protest. For though Poseidon's realm was untamed and full of peril, there was majesty in its depths that no throne of clouds could match. He looked out toward the horizon where light met water, and he felt something ancient stir within him, recognition, as though the sea had been waiting for him since the first dawn. "Then so it shall be," said Zeus, lifting his thunderbolt to the heavens. "The sky shall be my realm, and the earth shall lie beneath my watch." Hades lowered his hood, his eyes glimmering like obsidian stars. "And I," he murmured, "shall rule the silent lands below, where all things end and return." Poseidon said nothing. Instead, he stepped forward and placed his trident upon the ground. The earth trembled, and from its cracks poured water, clear, cold, and full of light. It spread in every direction, filling the low places of the world, shaping the rivers and the seas. As it flowed, it whispered to him in 1,000 voices, calling his name. "Then the sea is mine," he said softly, and the waves answered. From that moment, the world found balance. Zeus became the symbol of order and authority, ruling from the gleaming heights of Olympus. Hades became the keeper of endings and silence, ensuring the cycle of life continued without corruption. And Poseidon, the middle brother, became the embodiment of movement, the bridge between worlds, the pulse that connected sky, earth, and underworld alike. But no gift comes without burden. The sea was beautiful, yes, but it was also boundless, unknowable, and restless. It mirrored Poseidon's own soul, calm one moment, furious the next. He learned quickly that ruling the ocean was unlike ruling the sky or the underworld. It was not a throne one could sit upon, but a living, breathing entity that demanded respect. When Poseidon first descended to claim his realm, the world trembled. He walked across the waves, each step forming whirlpools that spun outward into eternity. The creatures of the deep gathered in awe. Leviathans stirred from their slumber. Dolphins leapt in silver arcs, and schools of fish swirled like galaxies around him. Even the corals seemed to bloom in his presence, painting the seabed in reds, golds, and blues. He did not conquer the sea, he joined it. His mind became attuned to its endless rhythms. He could feel the pull of tides like a heartbeat, could sense storms forming leagues away. Every current whispered its secrets to him. Every shell sang of the world above. He was no longer just Poseidon. Son of Cronus, he was the sea made conscious. In the earliest days of his rule, Poseidon built his palace beneath the waves. It rose from the ocean floor like a dream made solid. Walls of white coral, floors paved with mother-of-pearl, ceilings that shimmered with trapped sunlight refracted through the depths. Great pillars shaped like spiraling seashells lined the halls, and the sound of the tide echoed faintly through every chamber. At its heart stood the throne of the Sea King, carved from a single conch shell so vast that even giants would have knelt before it. Around it lay treasures that no mortal eye would ever see, pearls the size of stars, gems plucked from the ocean floor, and sculptures made of crystal that caught the dim light and turned it into rainbows. Yet Poseidon's greatest treasure was not of gold or jewel, but motion, the eternal dance of the water itself, the ceaseless rise and fall of the waves. From this throne, Poseidon ruled. His attendants, the Nereids, the sea nymphs of radiant beauty, surrounded him, their laughter like rippling currents. Triton, his son and herald, stood by his side, sounding his conch horn to announce the god's will across the oceans. To the mortals who would one day sail above, the horn's echo became a sign of storms or calm, of divine favor or wrath. And yet, even in majesty, Poseidon's heart was restless. His brothers ruled realms with clear boundaries. Zeus's sky stretched upward to infinity, Hades' underworld downward into darkness. But the sea was both surface and depth, seen and unseen, calm and violent. It obeyed no border. Its endless motion reminded Poseidon of himself, a being caught between serenity and tempest. He found joy in his power, but unease in his solitude. He missed the laughter of Olympus, the voice of his brother Zeus booming across the clouds, the faint echo of Hades' measured wisdom. The sea was his, but it was vast, too vast perhaps, for even a god to master. Sometimes he rose from the depths to walk upon the shores, his trident in hand, watching the young lands forming above. Rivers flowed toward him as if paying tribute. Lakes glimmered like eyes staring back at their maker. He could feel the sky's reflection upon the waves, Zeus's realm mirrored in his own, and he smiled. "We are brothers still," he murmured to the wind. Yet mortals were not born to rule the world alone. The gods were its first masters, and even they felt the weight of destiny. Poseidon's dominion stretched farther than sight, but he could not help but sense the boundaries between realms growing tense. The sky, the sea, and the underworld each depended upon the other, yet each sought dominion in its own way. The harmony they had forged in victory was fragile, balanced on the edge of pride. Poseidon began to see how even gods could crave more. The sea was infinite, but his reach upon land was limited. The thought gnawed at him that the world of men would one day praise the skies, fear the underworld, and forget the ocean that fed their lives. It was in this quiet unease that the seeds of rivalry began to grow. The balance that had united the brothers after war would soon give way to competition, to pride, to the struggles that echo through every myth that bears Poseidon's name. But for now, in the newborn age of peace, Poseidon stood upon his throne beneath the waves, the trident glowing faintly in his grasp. Around him swirled the lights of the deep blues and greens and the faintest hints of gold. The sea breathed, slow and eternal, its currents winding through every corner of the world. He closed his eyes, listening to its song. The war was over. The cosmos was divided, and from that division, harmony was born, fragile, beautiful, and fleeting as the calm before a storm. The palace beneath the waters, deep beneath the sunlit waves where light dissolves into blue twilight, the sea hides a kingdom older than any mortal empire. It lies beyond the reach of storms and sailors, a realm of whispering currents and glowing silence, the kingdom of Poseidon, lord of the oceans. It was here that the god built his palace, a dwelling so magnificent that even Olympus envied its beauty. In that shimmering deep, where coral forests swayed like slow music, the god of the sea forged his throne and his identity. Poseidon descended from the surface, not in triumph, but in contemplation. The war had ended, the cosmos divided, and yet he felt the echo of thunder in his veins, the hunger of unfinished purpose. The sea awaited him, vast, restless, unclaimed. Its expanse stretched beyond sight, a labyrinth of shadowed valleys, chasms deeper than thought, and plains of sand where strange creatures drifted like dreams. The water pulsed with life, and though it bowed to his power, it also tested him. The sea, like the god himself, was wild, proud, and free. For days and nights beyond mortal reckoning, Poseidon wandered through his new dominion. The sun above was a faint shimmer, a ghost of gold that filtered down like memory. Around him swam beings older than mankind's ancestors, glowing fish with eyes like stars, vast serpents that coiled through the trenches, and silent giants that glided in the dark. All turned their gaze upon the god who walked where no god had ever walked before. He listened to the language of the sea, not with ears, but with spirit. Each current whispered secrets, each wave hummed with meaning. He felt the pulse of the deep, the rhythm of tides that had been flowing since time itself was born. And in that communion, Poseidon began to understand his realm, not as a place to rule, but as a being to join with. The ocean was not his possession, it was his reflection. It was in the heart of that realization that the god chose the place where his palace would rise. It was an ancient trench at the center of the world, where the sea floor dipped into a vast hollow encircled by living coral. There the currents met, the waters of every ocean converging in eternal dance. It was the navel of the sea, the point from which all tides were born. Poseidon lifted his trident and drove it into the earth. The ocean shook, and from its bed rose towers of coral and shell. Crystals from the deep trenches shimmered into walls, translucent and alive, glowing with soft blue light. Seashells the size of mountains curved into arches, their surfaces etched with the runes of the first waves. Pearls rolled upward from the sand, thousands upon thousands, until they gleamed like 1,000 moons beneath the dark. At last the palace stood not a fortress of stone, but a living organism, pulsing with the rhythm of the tide. Its walls breathed, expanding and contracting in gentle cadence. Inside, its halls shimmered with shifting light that moved like the reflections on water. Every ripple carried sound, every movement echoed through corridors like whispers of the deep. It was a place of infinite stillness and motion all at once, a paradox that only the sea could hold. Poseidon ascended the steps to his throne, carved from a single conch shell larger than any chariot. Its edges glowed with faint luminescence, and when he sat upon it, the very currents bowed in acknowledgement. He could feel the heartbeat of the ocean through its surface, each throb a pulse of power that radiated outward through the sea. His reign had begun. The first to approach him were the Nereids, 50 daughters of the ancient sea god Nereus and the kind-hearted Doris. They were beings of grace and light, their hair flowing like kelp in gentle currents, their laughter echoing like the chiming of shells. They gathered around Poseidon, weaving songs to welcome him. They crowned him with a circlet of coral and pearls, and their dance filled the palace with motion, as though the sea itself celebrated its king. Among them was Amphitrite, the most serene and silent of the Nereids. She alone did not sing. Instead, she watched Poseidon with eyes like green fire, deep and unblinking. The god, who had faced titans and storms, felt for the first time something akin to humility. He spoke her name, and the sea grew still. It was said that from that moment onward, wherever Poseidon's gaze fell upon her, the waters calmed, But Amphitrite, shy and cautious, fled from him, for even the sea fears its own depths. She vanished into the farthest reaches of the ocean, beyond the lands of coral and whale song. Poseidon searched for her endlessly, his trident lighting the deep like a beacon. The dolphins guided him, the fish scattered before him, but Amphitrite remained hidden. In his pursuit, Poseidon created many wonders. He shaped the first coral gardens as gifts for her return, and from his longing were born the pearls, tears of the sea hardened into beauty. When she finally returned, persuaded by the songs of the gentle dolphin Delphinus, Poseidon's joy shook the waters. In gratitude, he placed the image of the dolphin among the stars, where it would shine forever as the constellation Delphinus. Their union became the balance of his realm, his temper calmed by her serenity, his storms softened by her song. From them came Triton, their son, who would one day inherit the conch that called the seas to war or peace. Poseidon's court flourished. Around him gathered beings of every kind. The 50 Nereids, the graceful Oceanids, the old sea god Nereus with his unchanging wisdom, and the powerful four-seasoned Ceto, guardians of the deep. Creatures of legend came and went, hippocamps with the bodies of horses and tails of fish, giant turtles that carried coral cities upon their backs, and leviathans whose eyes glowed like lanterns in the abyss. The palace was a living dream, full of sound and movement. Yet Poseidon was not only a god of beauty, he was also a god of force. Beyond the calm glow of his coral halls stretched the restless oceans, and from his throne he felt their every tremor. The sea was not always gentle. It raged when he raged, it frothed when his temper rose. When Poseidon grew silent and thoughtful, the waters mirrored his calm, the waves smoothing into mirrors of stillness. His moods shaped the world. Mortals would later learn this truth in fear. To anger the god of the sea was to invite ruin. Still, in those first centuries of rule, Poseidon's dominion was largely tranquil. The earth healed from the Titan War, and the gods began to craft the world into order. Mountains rose at Zeus's command. Forests grew under the watch of Demeter and Artemis. Rivers carved paths toward Poseidon's waiting arms. The sea became the lifeblood of creation, feeding every shore, cradling every island, connecting the continents like the veins of the world. It was during this age of peace that Poseidon explored the farthest corners of his realm. He journeyed to the cold northern waters where ice formed palaces of its own, their towers shining like glass. He visited the boiling vents of the deep trenches, where fire and water mingled in secret union. He watched the migration of whales and the birth of coral, the swirling dance of plankton that turned darkness into light. In his travels, he discovered that even within his dominion, there were mysteries beyond divine comprehension. There were places where the sea whispered in tongues no god understood, where shapes moved that were older than memory. He sensed them in the black waters below the trenches, immense, dreaming presences that stirred only when he passed. The sea, he realized, had its own gods, its own spirits. He was their master, yet not their creator. He was the conductor of an orchestra that had begun playing long before he took the baton. The understanding humbled him. From that humility grew wisdom. Poseidon learned restraint, a rare quality among the immortals. He came to see that the sea could not be commanded as mortals command ships. It could only be guided, nudged by will and emotion. The ocean was not a kingdom of obedience, but of harmony. He began to rule through rhythm rather than decree, through influence rather than domination. It was this harmony that mortals would one day feel when the waves lapped gently upon the shore, when the tide came and went as though breathing with the earth itself. Sailors would learn to read his moods by the sea's color and texture, a calm turquoise when he slept, a silver shimmer when he watched, and a dark, rolling grey when his anger stirred. Still, the god's restlessness never fully left him. In his palace beneath the waves, surrounded by endless beauty, he often looked upward through the ceiling of water that shimmered like glass toward the faint glow of the surface world. He wondered what lay beyond that thin, bright veil. The lands of his brother Zeus, the mountains where mortals would one day build cities, the air where clouds drifted like dreams. It was there, on the border between his world and theirs, that Poseidon's thoughts would soon turn, and from that curiosity would rise both wonders and wars. For the sea, though it appears to yield, is always seeking to reclaim what it has lost. And Poseidon, lord of that eternal tide, would learn that even a god cannot resist the call of the shore. The forge of the trident. The sea was vast, alive, and endlessly shifting, yet something within Poseidon longed for permanence, for a symbol of his dominion that would endure even when the waves forgot his name. Every god bore an emblem of their power. Zeus wielded lightning, sharp and swift, the mark of authority and justice. Hades wore his helm of darkness, invisible as death itself. But Poseidon, the middle brother, the one whose realm touched both, carried only his will, and the sea, though mighty, was not enough to bear his temper's edge. He sought a weapon not for destruction alone, but as an extension of the sea's nature, a tool of balance, creation, and fury in equal measure. It was then he called upon the Cyclopes, the divine smiths who had once fought by his side in the Titanomachy. Hidden deep beneath the volcanic island of Lipara, these one-eyed giants forged wonders for the gods. Zeus's thunderbolt, Hades's helm, and the unbreakable chains that bound the Titans in Tartarus. Poseidon descended through tunnels of smoke and fire to their cavernous workshop. The air burned thick with the scent of metal and ash. The walls glowed with molten rivers that hissed as they cooled. Sparks leapt through the shadows like living stars. The Cyclopes worked in rhythmic silence, their hammers striking the anvils in a cadence older than song. At the center stood Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, the three brothers of the forge. When Poseidon entered, their single eyes shone with light drawn from the molten core of the earth itself. "We know why you have come," said Brontes, his voice echoing like distant thunder. "The sea is boundless, but even the ocean must carry a weapon worthy of its god." Poseidon nodded. "I do not seek conquest," he said. "I seek mastery, a tool to calm the waters and to stir them when need demands. Something born from the earth's fire, but loyal to the sea's heart." The Cyclopes exchanged glances. Arges, the youngest, smiled. "Then your weapon must be forged of both," he said. "Of sea and fire, of calm and storm. It must hold the world's breath in its prongs." For 9 days and nights, the Cyclopes labored. They drew molten ore from the deepest vents beneath the ocean's crust, where fire met salt water in eternal war. They cooled it in Poseidon's own tears, collected from his moments of longing and wrath. They shaped it with hammers of coral and anvils of volcanic rock, chanting hymns to both the sea and the sky. The forge trembled with divine energy. The air quivered with heat so intense it could melt the bones of mountains. Poseidon watched in silence as his weapon took shape. The metal gleamed like moonlight upon water, not silver, not gold, but something between, fluid yet unbreakable. Its 3 prongs curved outward, each sharp enough to pierce the heart of stone, each humming with power. When the Cyclopes quenched it in the waters of the deepest trench, steam rose that covered the world in mist for 7 days. When at last the weapon was complete, Brontes lifted it high, and the glow of the forge dimmed as though in reverence. "Behold," he said, "the trident of the sea, 3 prongs for the 3 brothers, the heavens, the underworld, and the ocean. Strike with it, and the world shall tremble. Touch with it, and life shall spring from barren stone." Poseidon stepped forward and took the trident in his hand. The moment his fingers closed around it, the sea itself stirred. He felt its pulse in his arm, a rhythm not unlike his own heartbeat, steady and infinite. The weapon thrummed softly, like the distant crash of waves. He swung it once through the air, and the cavern shuddered. A wall of molten rock split in 2, revealing a river of flame. He lowered it, and the same river froze solid, turned to obsidian. The Cyclopes bowed their heads, awed. "It knows you," murmured Arges. "As the sea knows its lord." Poseidon raised the trident once more and struck it upon the ground. Instantly, a tremor ran through the earth. Far above, mountains shook and new springs burst from the soil. The oceans swelled and the waves rolled outward in concentric circles, as if greeting their master. From that moment, wherever Poseidon walked, the ground beneath remembered his step. When he left the forge, the sky was dark with thunderclouds. Zeus's lightning flickered far above, perhaps in salute, perhaps in warning. Poseidon lifted his trident to the heavens, and lightning struck its tip, fusing with the weapon's metal. For an instant, sea and sky became one, the light of Zeus and the power of Poseidon intertwined. The god smiled. "We are brothers still," he whispered to the storm. He returned to his palace beneath the sea, and the waters opened before him. The trident glowed faintly, illuminating the depths like a sun that never set. Its power radiated through the currents, calming some, stirring others. The dolphins followed in its wake, leaping joyfully. The whales sang in deep tones that echoed for leagues. Even the leviathans of the trench lifted their colossal heads in acknowledgement. In the heart of his coral throne room, Poseidon held the trident aloft. Amphitrite watched from beside him, her gaze soft and proud. The Nereids gathered in a circle, their song weaving through the water like silk. "You have given the sea its heart," she said softly, "and in doing so you have given it peace." But Poseidon knew that peace was fleeting. The trident was more than a symbol of dominion, it was a reminder of his dual nature. Its points represented the balance between destruction, creation, and control. With one motion, he could raise islands from the deep or sink them without trace. He could summon fountains to quench a desert or floods to erase empires. The trident's gift was power, and power was a burden. In time, mortals would come to know its mark. When the earth shook, they would whisper that Poseidon had struck the ground in anger. When new islands rose from the sea, they would say he had touched the world in mercy. When storms swallowed ships, they would see the flash of his trident in the lightning and pray for forgiveness. Poseidon accepted this truth with solemn grace. He was not a god of judgment that was Zeus's domain, but of consequence. The trident ensured that every action, mortal or divine, rippled outward forever, like a stone cast into still water. Nothing was without effect. No wave rose without cause. He tested its power upon the ocean floor, carving canyons deeper than light could reach, shaping mountains that would one day form islands. He struck once upon the surface, and from that blow rose the island of Delos, where future gods would be born. He struck again, and springs of sweet water burst from the earth, mingling with salt to create estuaries where life flourished. Each act was deliberate, balanced between wrath and renewal. But the trident's greatest power was its resonance with the world's heartbeat. When Poseidon closed his eyes and gripped its shaft, he could feel every tremor beneath the crust, every whisper of tide, every movement of the sea's smallest creature. It was as if he held the pulse of existence itself. The sensation was overwhelming, exhilarating, and humbling in equal measure. He realized that the sea, like the gods, was alive in every sense. And now, through this weapon, he could speak its language. Zeus once visited him in those early days, descending in a blaze of lightning that split the surface waters. They met at the threshold between realms, one framed by clouds, the other by coral light. "Brother," said Zeus, his voice like rolling thunder, "your trident shakes even Olympus. Do you mean to rival me?" Poseidon smiled, calm as the still sea before a storm. "No," he said, "the sea does not rival the sky, it reflects it." Zeus studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let reflection be our bond. But remember, when the sea rises, so too must the heavens answer." Poseidon inclined his head, and the waters rippled outward in salute. Between them, a fragile harmony was forged, a balance of thunder and tide, of storm and silence. It would hold for centuries, until pride and rivalry tested it again. When Zeus departed, Poseidon turned his gaze once more to the deep. He lifted his trident, and with a single motion, the sea began to move in time with his will. Tides rose and fell, currents formed their eternal paths, and the world found its rhythm. The ocean was no longer a chaotic abyss, but a breathing entity, its every motion guided by the god who held its heart. From that day onward, the trident became the symbol of Poseidon's reign, not a weapon of tyranny, but a promise of balance. It was the axis upon which the world's waters turned, the heartbeat of the sea itself. And so, with his trident in hand and his realm alive beneath him, Poseidon took his place as one of the great rulers of the cosmos. The war was long ended, the sea was his own, and the world would forever remember the god whose breath was the tide, whose anger was the quake, and whose touch could turn stone into life. The contest for Athens, above the silver-blue waters of the Aegean, the newborn world of Greece glittered with promise. The mountains were green and young, rivers still carved their beds, and the air smelled of salt, pine, and sun-warmed stone. Mortals, still trembling under the watch of the gods, began to build small cities along the coasts, their lives balanced between land and sea. And in one corner of that shining land, a small city rose proud and bright, perched upon a rocky hill beside the water. Its people called it Cecropia, after their first king, Cecrops, a man wise and just, half human and half serpent. He honored the gods and prayed for a patron to protect his city forever. From Olympus, the gods looked down. They saw the smoke of human fires curling upward, the glint of bronze tools, and the promise of devotion in mortal hearts. Among them, two deities took notice: Athena, daughter of Zeus, goddess of wisdom and strategy, and Poseidon, lord of the sea, master of storms and creator of horses. Both desired the city. Both saw in its strength a reflection of themselves. Poseidon was the first to descend. With a flash of light and the crash of thunder, he appeared upon the Acropolis, his trident gleaming like lightning made solid. The mortals fell to their knees as he struck the rocky earth. The stone split, and from the crack burst a spring water gushing forth in a shimmering fountain that sparkled in the sunlight. The people gasped in awe. "Behold," cried Poseidon, "a gift from the Lord of the Sea, a well that will never dry, a source of strength for your city forever." Tested 2 is Lie 5. The water splashed against the stone, glimmering like crystal. The people hurried forward, eager to drink, but when they tasted it, their faces fell, for the water was salt, drawn from the deep sea itself. Though it was beautiful, it could not quench their thirst. Poseidon smiled, not in cruelty, but in pride. "It is the sea's gift," he said, "the sign of your connection to all the waters of the earth. With me as your guardian, your ships shall rule the waves. Your people will travel far and conquer trade and tide alike. You will never hunger, for the ocean's bounty will be yours." His voice echoed across the city, powerful and resonant. The people were moved, yet even as they marveled, the sky shimmered again, and Athena appeared. She descended in a column of golden light, her grey eyes calm, her armor gleaming. In her hand she carried no weapon, only a single seed. She looked upon the spring that Poseidon had made and then turned to the people. "A great gift my uncle has given you," she said, "but it brings salt and storm. My gift shall bring peace." She knelt upon the earth beside the spring and pressed the seed into the soil. Her fingers glowed faintly, and from the ground grew a tree tall, slender, and full of silver-green leaves. Its trunk twisted gracefully. Its fruit glimmered like gold in the light. The first olive tree had been born. The air grew still. The mortals looked upon it and saw not power, but promise oil for their lamps, fruit for their tables, wood for their homes. The tree whispered of prosperity and endurance. "This," said Athena, "will feed your children, heal your wounds, and endure when cities crumble. My gift is wisdom, the power to grow, to create, to endure." Poseidon watched in silence. The spring beside the tree shimmered, as if uncertain which of them held the greater blessing. The people turned from one to the other, torn between strength and wisdom, conquest and peace, storm and light. King Cecrops, wise and fair, stepped forward. "Both gods have honored us," he said, bowing deeply, "but only one may be the guardian of our city. We must choose." He asked the men of the city to vote for Poseidon and the women for Athena, for in that age, women were considered the bearers of life and wisdom. When the votes were counted, Athena had won by one, and so the city became hers, and it was renamed Athens. Poseidon's eyes darkened like storm clouds. The sea stirred. Thunder rolled across the horizon. "You choose peace over power?" he said, his voice low as the rumble of waves before a tempest. "You choose a tree over the tide?" Cecrops knelt before him, his head bowed. "Lord of the seas," he said, "we do not reject you. The sea gives us food, trade, and travel. But our hearts belong to the wisdom that builds, not the power that destroys. We will honor you always, but the city must stand under Athena's name." For a moment, silence hung over the hill. Then Poseidon raised his trident and struck the ground beside the spring. The earth shook, and the water surged higher, splashing against the olive tree. "So be it," he said. "You have chosen well, and yet you will never forget the sea's claim." He turned, and his eyes softened as he looked upon Athena. There was no hatred between them, only understanding. "You are the calmer wave," he said, "and I am the storm. Let both be remembered in this place." Athena bowed her head. "Without the sea, no wisdom would reach beyond these shores," she replied. Poseidon descended back into the waters, his departure marked by the sound of thunder fading into calm. From that day forward, the salt spring continued to bubble beside Athena's olive tree. It was said that when the sea god's temper stirred, the water would churn violently, and when he was at peace, it would run clear. The Athenians built a temple upon the hill, the Erechtheion, where both gifts remained side by side, eternal reminders of that divine contest. And though the city bore Athena's name, it never forgot Poseidon. Every sailor who left its harbours prayed first to him, pouring oil from the olive tree into the water as an offering. The gods, though rivals, shared the city's devotion, wisdom, and the sea forever intertwined. Poseidon watched from his throne beneath the waves as Athens grew into a beacon of beauty and knowledge. He saw its ships carve silver paths across his domain, its people sail to distant lands, carrying olive oil and ideas alike. Pride softened his earlier resentment. "Perhaps," he mused, "the sea has not lost, but found its reflection in the land." The years flowed like tides. Athens flourished under Athena's watchful gaze, yet every storm that battered its coasts reminded the mortals of the god they had nearly chosen. When their ships returned safely from foreign shores, they sacrificed white bulls to Poseidon, their blood mingling with the foam of the waves. When drought struck, they prayed at the salt spring for his mercy, and Poseidon, though proud, was not cruel. He sent rain to fill their wells, winds to guide their sails, and calm seas to cradle their journeys. For though the city had chosen another, its heart still beat in rhythm with the ocean. Yet the story of the contest for Athens was more than the tale of two gods. It was the reflection of the eternal balance between land and sea, between wisdom and might. It showed that even among the immortals, pride must bow to purpose. Poseidon learned that his dominion, though vast, was not diminished by sharing its edge with wisdom. The sea touched every shore, and in that touch it carried knowledge. The spring and the tree still stand side by side in myth salt and sweet, strength and peace bound forever by the rivalry that was never truly rivalry, but harmony misunderstood. For in every wise decision there is a whisper of the sea's fury, and in every storm the calm promise of renewal. Thus ended the contest for Athens, not with victory or defeat, but with balance. And Poseidon, though denied the city, gained something greater, a symbol of coexistence between the storm and the stillness, between his power and Athena's grace, love, rage, and the depths. The sea, though eternal, is not without emotion. It sighs with calm when the wind is gentle. It murmurs like a lover when the moon pulls at its breast, and it roars in wrath when storms awaken from the deep. So too was Poseidon not merely a god of waves and earthquakes, but of passions vast as his realm. Beneath the surface of his composure lay a heart as restless as the tides themselves, capable of tenderness and destruction in the same breath. In the stillness of his palace, Poseidon often wandered the coral halls alone, the echo of his footsteps lost in the song of the sea. Though Amphitrite, his queen, ruled beside him with grace, his spirit could not be bound to one presence alone. He loved fiercely but fleetingly, drawn by curiosity, beauty, and power wherever he found them. The sea touches every shore, so too did Poseidon's heart. Yet love for an immortal god is never simple. Each story of his affection was entwined with both creation and consequence. For when gods love mortals or nymphs, the world itself is changed. The first of these tales began not in the sea, but in the storm. There was once a goddess of the earth named Demeter, golden-haired and solemn, who walked the fertile fields of the world. Poseidon saw her one morning as dawn painted the waves with light. She moved through the wheat like a whisper, her hair catching the wind. Desire stirred in him like the rising tide. He descended from his watery throne, the surface splitting as he emerged, and followed her across the meadows. Demeter, feeling his presence, fled. She transformed herself into a mare and joined a herd to hide among them. But Poseidon was relentless. He changed himself into a stallion, his mane wild as sea foam, his hooves pounding like waves on the shore. From their union came Arion, a horse of divine speed, swift as the wind and untamed as the surf. The sound of his gallop became the thunder of distant storms. Though Demeter's heart remained cool, Poseidon's passion for her lingered as memory not of conquest, but of creation. From that day onward, he became the patron of horses, the shaper of their form, their breath, and their grace. Mortals would later whisper that when horses run along the beach, the sea god's spirit runs beside them, their hooves drumming his eternal rhythm into the sand. But not all his loves were divine. Poseidon's gaze often fell upon mortals, whose fragility fascinated him. Among them was Tyro, a princess descended from Aeolus, who lived by a river that whispered of destiny. The god watched her often, her hair glimmering like gold beneath the sun. He took on the form of her beloved river and came to her in a dream, his voice a murmur of flowing water. When she woke, she carried his children Peleus and Neleus, who would grow into kings and founders of cities. Their blood carried both the steadiness of the land and the wild pulse of the sea. Yet even divine affection can wound. Poseidon's loves, like storms, could not be contained. One such tale spoke of Medusa, once a mortal woman, beautiful beyond compare, her hair like the wings of ravens, her eyes bright as polished bronze. Poseidon saw her within Athena's temple, where she served as a priestess. Drawn by her grace, he came to her beneath the sacred roof. The world outside trembled with thunder as sea and stone met in secret passion. But Athena, the virgin goddess, saw this act as desecration of her temple. In her fury, she did not punish Poseidon, for no god may truly be judged by another, but turned her wrath upon Medusa, transforming her into a Gorgon, her beauty twisted into terror. From that union, when Perseus later struck down Medusa, sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the warrior with a golden sword. Even from punishment, Poseidon's line gave birth to wonder-proof that creation often walks hand in hand with tragedy. Pegasus, born from blood and foam, rose into the sky, wings glistening like morning dew. Poseidon watched from below as his son soared higher, unbound by the sea's horizon. A quiet pride stirred within him, for though the sky belonged to Zeus, this creature of the waves had claimed it too. Wherever Pegasus flew, clouds gathered like mist, and rain followed, joining heaven and ocean once more. But the god's heart, ever turbulent, also harbored rage. Poseidon was not easily offended, yet when mortals betrayed his trust or mocked his power, his temper could awaken storms that reshaped entire coasts. The tale of his wrath upon King Minos of Crete was one such storm. Minos had prayed to Poseidon for a sign to prove his right to rule, promising to sacrifice whatever the gods sent him from the sea. Poseidon, hearing his plea, sent forth a bull of perfect beauty, white as foam, strong as thunder, its eyes glowing with divine fire. But Minos, enchanted by the creature's majesty, broke his vow. He kept the bull for himself and offered a lesser one in its place. When Poseidon saw the deception, his calm broke like a shattered wave. He cursed the king's house with ruin. The white bull turned wild, ravaging the fields, and from the queen's unnatural desire, twisted by divine vengeance, came the Minotaur, half man, half beast. The labyrinth that held it became a symbol of mortal arrogance, tangled in divine retribution. Yet even in his fury, Poseidon's punishments carried the weight of lesson, not cruelty. He was the god of consequence, not spite. Every broken oath, every forgotten offering, rippled outward as surely as a pebble disturbs still water. In his rare moments of quiet, Poseidon would sit beside Amphitrite upon his coral throne, watching the play of light across the sea. "Do you ever tire of them?" she once asked softly, meaning mortals. He smiled faintly. "They are like waves," he said. "Each one rises, crashes, and disappears yet together. They shape the shore. They worship and defy me in equal measure. I do not tire of them. I am them." Amphitrite looked at him with eyes like calm tide pools. "And what of love?" she asked. "Is it not their greatest storm?" Poseidon turned to her, the faintest sadness flickering across his gaze. "Love is the tide that binds gods and men alike," he said. "We rise in it, we drown in it, and yet we return always. It find Fruber find." The sea outside the palace swelled gently, reflecting his words. For though Poseidon's passions often brought turmoil, they also gave birth to creation itself. From love came life, from wrath, renewal. The same trident that could shatter mountains could also summon springs from barren stone. In the centuries that followed, Poseidon's name became both prayer and warning. Sailors poured wine into the sea before each voyage, begging for his favor. Lovers swore oaths upon his waves, believing their vows unbreakable as tides. Kings built temples to calm his temper, but artists and poets sang of his heart, not the destroyer, but the dreamer beneath the storm. For no god embodied contradiction more completely than Poseidon, a ruler of chaos who sought harmony, a bringer of wrath who longed for connection, a lover whose touch gave birth to both monsters and miracles. And so the sea itself became his mirror, its beauty inseparable from its danger, its serenity inseparable from its depth. To love Poseidon was to love the ocean endlessly, fearfully, faithfully. To anger him was to invite the storm, and yet, after every tempest, calm always returned, the wrath of the waves. Beneath the calm shimmer of the ocean's surface lies a truth older than mankind, that the sea is never fully at peace. Even when it sleeps, its dreams are restless, rolling with hidden motion. So too was Poseidon, the heart of that vastness, serene in moments yet never still. For all his power to nurture, his temper could summon devastation. Mortals called him Enosicthon Earthshaker, the name that trembled on their lips whenever the ground split or the waves rose high enough to swallow the horizon. His wrath was not mindless, though men often believed it so. Like the sea, it was provoked by imbalance, by pride, by insult, by the forgetfulness of mortals who owed their survival to the mercy of his tides. And no tale captured that divine fury more than the journey of Odysseus, king of Ithaca, the man who defied gods and waves alike. When Troy fell, its towers burning under the vengeance of the Greeks, Odysseus set sail for home. His ships gleamed with plunder, his men weary and proud. But among the dead left behind was the Cyclops Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, and his cry for vengeance echoed across the waters. Odysseus, clever but arrogant, had blinded the giant to save his men, then boasted of his deed as he sailed away, shouting his name into the wind. It was that pride that need to be known that doomed him. From his throne beneath the sea, Poseidon heard the call of his wounded son. The ocean darkened. The trident hummed with awakening rage. He mocked the sea itself, the god said, his voice rolling through the deep like thunder beneath the surface. Let him learn what it means to name himself against a god. The winds obeyed. Clouds massed upon the horizon, their edges black and electric. The first storm struck like a living creature, its jaws made of lightning and rain. Odysseus's ships were tossed like driftwood. Masts splintered, sails tore, and men cried out for mercy as the sea swallowed them. But Poseidon was not merciful, not yet. He spared the cunning king to wander, to learn humility not through death, but through endless motion. For 10 years, the waves denied Odysseus his home. Every shore he reached was a mirage, every calm a false promise. He washed ashore upon strange lands, loved and cursed by goddesses, until even his pride eroded like cliffs beneath the tide. Only when Poseidon saw the man broken, clinging to driftwood upon a sea gone still, did he relent. "So you have learned," the god murmured, and turned his gaze away. Odysseus returned at last to Ithaca, not in triumph, but in gratitude, a lesson etched upon every scar. The mortals would later tell his tale as warning, that the sea does not forgive arrogance, and that Poseidon's justice, though delayed, is certain. Yet Odysseus was not the only one to feel the sea's vengeance. Kings and empires rose along the coasts of the world, their temples gleaming white against the blue, and many thought themselves above divine will. When they defied Poseidon, the sea rose to remind them of their place. In the land of Corinth, a proud city built near the isthmus, a mortal king once refused the god his due. The sailors of that port had long prospered under Poseidon's favour, but their offerings grew fewer as their wealth increased. They feasted on fish and salt and claimed mastery of the waves, forgetting that every tide that lifted their ships came at the god's pleasure. One night, as they slept, the sea crept closer. The moon rose pale and thin over the water, its light glinting on the waves like the edge of a blade. Without warning, the ocean surged. Walls of water rolled over the harbour, dragging ships, houses, and men into the deep. When morning came, the city was gone, its ruins scattered like shells across the seafloor. Only a single altar remained, carved with the image of a trident untouched, gleaming as though newly made. The survivors rebuilt and vowed never again to forget the god's name. They poured wine into the sea before every voyage, whispering, "Forgive us, Earthshaker." But Poseidon's wrath was not always punishment. Sometimes it was balance. The sea, after all, cleanses even as it destroys. Where floods struck, the land grew richer. Where coasts sank, new islands rose. The god did not destroy out of cruelty. He did so to remind creation that nothing stands forever. Mortals saw only ruin, but Poseidon saw renewal, the eternal rhythm of fall and rise, ebb and flow. Yet among the gods, his temper was feared. Even Zeus, whose thunder ruled the heavens, hesitated to provoke him. For while the lightning's strike was brief, the sea's anger endured. When Poseidon raged, earthquakes rippled through the world, and mountains cracked like shells. It was said that he could topple Olympus itself if he ever wished, though he never did. His fury, though immense, was not without restraint, for he understood too well the weight of power. Still, there were moments when even he lost control. Once, when Zeus punished the hero Ajax the Lesser for defying him, the man's ship was struck by lightning and cast into the sea. As he clung to a rock, Ajax shouted, "I escaped the gods once, and I will again." Poseidon heard, and his patience snapped. He struck the rock with his trident, splitting it in two. Ajax fell into the water, swallowed by the waves. Even the echo of his defiance was erased, drowned beneath the god's silence. The mortals learned to respect that silence, to see calm seas not as safety, but as warning. For every ripple hides depth, and every still horizon conceals the possibility of storms. To live beside the ocean was to live beside a god who watched, patient and vast, remembering every oath, every insult, every prayer whispered into the surf. Yet there were those who understood him, who saw in his fury not vengeance, but truth. Sailors spoke of Poseidon as the most honest of gods, unbending, unmerciful, but fair. He gave to those who respected him and destroyed only those who forgot their place. His anger was the mirror of the sea's justice, even, impartial, eternal. In the islands of the Aegean, the people built temples on cliffs, their columns rising above the surf. The most beautiful of these stood at Cape Sunion, where the sea crashed endlessly against the rocks. Mariners would glimpse it from afar, white against the dark waves, and know they were under the god's gaze. They left offerings of bronze and salt, believing that if their hearts were pure, the sea would grant them passage. Sometimes, when the wind fell still and the water turned to glass, sailors claimed they could see his face beneath the surface, eyes like deep green whirlpools, calm and terrible. He did not smile, he only watched, measuring the hearts of those who dared to cross his realm. Even the other gods respected the rhythm of his wrath. When Hera once conspired against Zeus and asked Poseidon's aid, he refused. "You think to overthrow the sky," he said. "But have you forgotten what happens when the sea swallows the land? None will rule then, not sky, nor stone." And with that, he sent a single tremor through the mountain, reminding all Olympus of the strength that slept below. For Poseidon's power was not the sudden fury of fire, but the slow, inevitable might of water, the kind that wears mountains down, grain by grain, until only the sea remains. His trident was both weapon and warning. To wield it was to command the heart of the world, to shape the edges of continents and the depth of trenches. And yet, for all his might, Poseidon did not see himself as cruel. In his heart, his anger was simply part of the order of things, a storm's necessity. Without storm, there is no calm. Without destruction, there is no rebirth. The sea's wrath and the sea's mercy were not opposites, but the same force seen from different shores. Mortals would never fully understand that truth. To them, his name was both prayer and fear. They carved it into their ships, whispered it over their nets, cursed it in the height of storms. But Poseidon heard it all, the reverence, the defiance, the pleas, and in each voice he recognized his reflection. For the sea is not merely the realm of a god. It is the mirror of all creation, vast, merciless, beautiful, and alive. Poseidon and the builders of cities. The world began to calm after the storms of divine wrath and human arrogance. The waves grew gentler, their endless rhythm forming a steady heartbeat for the newborn civilizations rising along the coasts. Humanity, humbled by Poseidon's power, yet drawn irresistibly to his realm, built their homes where land met sea. They called to him not only in fear but in gratitude, for they knew that their survival, their trade, and their dreams all depended upon the tides. Poseidon, watching from his coral throne, found this new reverence curious. Men no longer fled from the ocean, they embraced it. They had learned to read its moods, to harness its winds, to sail its vast and glittering surface. They had turned the sea into their bridge to the world, and in that transformation, Poseidon saw the reflection of his own nature, restless, daring, unbound. He began to favor those who shaped the world with purpose. The builders, the sailors, the architects, mortals who carved beauty and order from chaos. He found kinship with them, for he too had once turned the formless sea into a living realm. His divine favor fell upon those who sought mastery not through violence, but through creation. In Corinth, a city balanced upon the narrow isthmus between two seas, Poseidon found such people. The Corinthian sailors prayed to him before setting sail. Their voices carried on the wind across both the Aegean and Ionian waters. They poured oil and wine into the surf, murmuring promises of safe passage. They built ships that glided like swans, their hulls painted with eyes to see through the waves. Poseidon smiled upon them, calming the storms that threatened their trade, guiding them by stars and currents known only to his mind. One mortal in particular caught the god's attention, Periander, a king who dreamed of connecting sea to sea, building a channel through the land itself. He longed to carve a path where ships could pass without peril, uniting the world's waters as Poseidon had done in the Age of Gods. Though the task was beyond mortal strength, Poseidon admired the vision. "He dreams as the sea dreams," the god murmured. "He would reshape the earth to move as I move." When Periander died, the canal remained unfinished, but Poseidon blessed the idea itself. It would linger through centuries until another age, when mortals learned enough of the sea to complete what the king had imagined. In this, Poseidon saw the slow evolution of mankind, the way they reached beyond their limits, just as waves reached forever for the shore. He also blessed the horse tamers, those who shared his gift of movement, power, and grace. In Thessaly, where the plains rolled like waves of grass, men learned to train horses for war and ceremony. The waves grew gentler, their endless rhythm forming a steady heartbeat for the newborn civilizations rising along the coasts. Humanity, humbled by Poseidon's power yet drawn irresistibly to his realm, built their homes where land met sea. They called to him not only in fear but in gratitude, for they knew that their survival, their trade, and their dreams all depended upon the tides. Poseidon, watching from his coral throne, found this new reverence curious. The temples of Poseidon himself became masterpieces of balance columns, standing as still as calm seas, roofs curving like waves about to crest. The greatest stood upon Cape Sunion, where land, sky, and water met. Its marble gleamed white in the sunlight and glowed gold at dusk. Sailors returning home would spot its columns long before the coast itself and fall to their knees in gratitude. There, upon that cliff, the god's presence was palpable. The air seemed charged. The sea below murmured as though in prayer. Offerings of wine, olive oil, and finely carved shells were placed upon his altar. At night, when torches burned along the temple's edge, the reflection upon the waves looked like stars descending into the sea. And though Poseidon dwelled far below, he felt their devotion as clearly as if he stood among them. He began to see humanity not as intruders upon the sea's edge, but as partners in creation. They built, he shaped. They dreamed, he provided the canvas. When they sailed, they carried his breath in their sails. When they carved harbours, they extended his reach inland. Their lives were a dialogue with the ocean, sometimes peaceful, sometimes perilous, but always bound. Still, his favour could not be taken for granted. Mortals who forgot respect for the balance of creation found their cities swallowed by their own ambition. In Hylike, a proud city of engineers and priests, arrogance bloomed like coral unchecked. Its people, rich from trade, began to mock the god they once adored. They forbade his worship, claiming their walls and machines could protect them from any wave. Poseidon watched in silence. He waited, patient as the tide. Then, one winter night, as the stars faded behind heavy clouds, the ground trembled. The sea drew back, a strange, sucking sound filling the air, and the people, puzzled, ran to the shore to see. What they saw was a wall of water, black and glistening, rising higher than the city's tallest tower. It came forward with the roar of 1,000 storms. When it struck, the city vanished. Temples, homes, ships, all were dragged beneath. When the dawn came, the sea had reclaimed the land entirely. Fishermen years later said they could see the ruins of Helike through the clear water, columns standing upright in silence. The god had simply taken back what was his. Poseidon's message was not vengeance but remembrance, that creation without reverence leads to ruin. The sea was generous, but it never forgot. Those who built with humility found prosperity. Those who built with pride met the tide's quiet justice. Beyond Greece, the god's influence rippled through every civilization that touched the water. The Phoenicians prayed to him beneath other names, their traders calling him the keeper of currents. The Egyptians saw him in the flooding Nile, and the Romans, inheriting Greece's myths, named him Neptune, god of their empire's might. Everywhere the sea reached, his essence followed, guiding, destroying, rebirthing. Yet Poseidon himself remained unchanged, untouched by the passage of mortal time. He continued to walk the ocean floor, trident in hand, watching the glow of human cities above like stars reflected on water. He had come to admire the builders, the dreamers who reached beyond their grasp, but he never ceased to test them. For to live beside the sea was to live beside a god who demanded both courage and humility. There were nights when he rose from the deep, unseen but felt. The sea would grow unnaturally still, the air heavy with expectation. Sailors would wake from their hammocks and stare out into the dark, sensing something vast moving beneath their ships. A single ripple would pass through the water, smooth, circular, like a god's touch, and then, faintly, they would hear it. A sound not of wind or whale or wave, but of breath deep and slow, as if the ocean itself exhaled. Those who heard it would kneel and whisper thanks. They knew the sign. Poseidon had passed, inspecting his domain. They dreamed, he provided the canvas. When they sailed, they carried his breath in their sails. When they carved harbours, they extended his reach inland. Their lives were a dialogue with the ocean, sometimes peaceful, sometimes perilous, but always bound. Still, his favour could not be taken for granted. Mortals who forgot respect for the balance of creation found their cities swallowed by their own ambition. To the builders of cities and civilizations, he was not only a deity, he was the foundation beneath all foundations, the balance upon which their empires floated. And though mortals could never truly know his heart, they came to understand this one truth. The ocean does not belong to them. It belongs to Poseidon, and through him, to the eternal rhythm of creation. The same waves that destroyed Helike had carried the ships of Athens. When he was pleased, the winds would shift in their favour, the sails would fill, and their journeys would end in safety. When he was displeased, they would not hear the sound again, only the crash of waves that came without warning, and the silence that followed. For Poseidon's gifts were like the sea itself, bountiful, unpredictable, absolute. He was the god of movement, the unseen hand beneath every harbour stone, every vessel's wake. Rivalries among the gods. No world ruled by immortals could ever remain in perfect harmony. The cosmos, though divided in fairness, trembled with the constant friction of pride. The gods, eternal and powerful, were as prone to jealousy and ambition as the mortals who worshipped them. Olympus shone with light and laughter, but beneath its marble calm pulsed a storm of rivalry, and at its heart, always between brotherhood and defiance, stood Poseidon the ocean incarnate, forever shifting between calm and fury. Zeus ruled the heavens with his thunderbolt, and Hades brooded in the underworld's shadow. Poseidon, master of the sea, lay between them both a mediator when peace was needed, a challenger when pride demanded it. Their bond as brothers was eternal, forged in war against the Titans, but their love was strained by power's weight. Each held dominion too great to ever bow completely. In the early days after the division of the cosmos, peace held. But as the ages passed and mankind spread across the earth, building temples and shaping myths, the gods' pride began to stir anew. Mortals, in their devotion, elevated one deity above another, and every prayer became a spark between the divine. The first great conflict between Poseidon and Zeus came not from hatred, but from the arrogance of mortals. In the land of Troy, long before the famous war that would burn its towers, there lived a king named Laomedon. He sought to build great walls around his city walls that would rival the works of the gods. To achieve this, he prayed for divine aid, promising offerings and honor in return. Zeus, always watchful, sent two immortals to test him, Apollo, god of light, and Poseidon, lord of the sea. Disguised as mortal craftsmen, they labored together for a year, raising walls so tall and strong that no army could breach them. But when their work was done, Laomedon revealed his treachery. He refused payment, mocking the strangers and threatening them with mortal punishment. Poseidon's calm broke like surf upon rocks. "You would deceive a god?" he thundered, his disguise falling away. The sea roared beyond Troy's gates, waves rising higher than the city's towers. Apollo's eyes burned with sunlight. "Your arrogance will drown you," he said. Together, they unleashed plague and storm upon the land. Crops withered, the rivers overflowed, and the walls they had built became the prison of Laomedon's pride. Only when he offered his daughter Hesione to the sea as sacrifice did Poseidon relent, sending a monstrous serpent to devour her. But the hero Heracles came and slew it, sealing Troy's fate for future generations. Zeus rebuked Poseidon for his fury, claiming he had overstepped the balance of divine justice. Poseidon answered coldly, "You gave me the sea to rule, brother, not to keep it tame. Even you cannot chain a tide." The heavens trembled with thunder, but Zeus said nothing more. Though they made peace again, a quiet tension lingered between them, a wave forever about to break. But if Zeus was Poseidon's rival in pride, it was Apollo who became his rival in patience. Their quarrel began not over mortals, but over art, the shaping of the world itself. Once, they joined together to build the walls of Troy, but later, their rivalry grew in sacred places. In Delphi, where the earth's navel pulsed with prophetic power, Poseidon had once held dominion. The oracle's sacred spring belonged to him, its waters a mirror of his voice. But when Apollo arrived, bearing his golden lyre and radiant bow, he desired the place for himself. The contest was not fought with weapons, but with song and vision. Poseidon stirred the waters to show the truth of the deep images of time and tide, of destiny flowing like rivers to the sea. Apollo answered with the music of light, a melody so pure that the mountains themselves leaned closer to hear. The gods of Olympus gathered to witness, and even Zeus was silent. In the end, Apollo's song won the hearts of the divine, and Delphi became his. Yet Poseidon did not rage. He simply smiled, his eyes as deep as the ocean floor. "Take the mountain," he said. "I will keep the sea and every reflection of your light within it." From that day, Apollo ruled Delphi, but the oracle's waters remained touched by Poseidon's essence. Every prophecy that rose from its depths carried the whisper of the sea, a reminder that truth, like water, flows from darkness before reaching light. Not all rivalries ended in peace. Once, Poseidon and Athena, though bound in mutual respect from their contest over Athens, found themselves at odds again. A mortal king, Erechtheus, built a temple that honored both gods, but in secret he offered more to Athena than to the sea lord. Poseidon struck the ground beside the temple, and the earth shook violently. Cracks spread through the marble, and a wave of brine surged up from beneath. flooding the sanctuary. Athena appeared and stayed his hand. "Brother," she said, "will you destroy what honors us both?" He stared at her, the trident still humming with power. "Mortals forget balance," he said. "They give wisdom to the sky and leave the sea empty-handed." Athena's voice softened. "Then teach them balance, not fear." Her words disarmed him. He lowered the trident, and the waters receded, leaving behind a pool of salt at the temple's heart, a symbol of his presence, eternal yet contained. Thus the Parthenon stood not only as Athena's triumph, but as proof of Poseidon's restraint. There were deeper rivalries still, subtle, unseen. Hera, queen of the heavens, often sought to pit brother against brother to humble Zeus's reign. She whispered in Poseidon's ear, sowing seeds of rebellion. "The sea is greater than the sky," she told him. "The waves touch every shore. Even the thunder's echo dies beneath them." For a time Poseidon listened. Together with Hera and Athena, he conspired to overthrow Zeus. They bound the king of gods in unbreakable chains, thinking the world would welcome his absence. But the ocean itself rebelled against the idea. The tides faltered, the wind grew still, and chaos returned. The cosmos cannot exist without balance, and Poseidon, master of that balance, felt the truth in his bones. He freed his brother, breaking the chains himself. Zeus's gratitude was fierce but wary. "Never again," the sky god warned, "shall Olympus shake with divided rule." Poseidon nodded. "Then rule wisely, or the sea will remind you what chaos feels like." It was no threat, only truth spoken by a god who understood that even power must serve order. Not all rivalries were bitter. With Artemis, goddess of the hunt and moonlit wilderness, Poseidon shared kinship through nature's silence. When she walked the forest, he walked the shore. Both protected the fragile balance between creation and destruction. Mortals said that when the moon cast silver upon the sea, it was the reflection of their quiet accord, water and light moving as one. Even Hades, though distant and cold, held no enmity toward him. The underworld's rivers flowed eventually to the sea, their currents carrying the souls of the dead into Poseidon's embrace. In that way, death and ocean were kin. The god of the sea felt the weight of that truth whenever storms claimed sailors. He did not weep for them. He guided them gently downward, where his brother would receive them in silence. Among the gods, Poseidon's nature was both feared and revered. He could not be contained by Olympus, nor corrupted by flattery. He was the reminder that all things flow, that even mountains crumble into rivers, and rivers fall into his waiting arms. His rivalries, his alliances, his wars, they were the waves of eternity, rising and falling, never ending, always returning. And through it all, he remained what he had always been, the god who would not yield, the storm that bowed to no wind, the heart of motion itself. When mortals prayed to Zeus, they looked upward. When they prayed to Hades, they bowed downward. But when they prayed to Poseidon, they looked to the horizon, that eternal line where all directions meet. For they knew that in the endless play of rivalry and power, of creation and destruction, it was the sea that endured. Poseidon's children of legend, the sea is not a barren realm. It teems with life both known and unseen, filled with creatures that defy the imagination of mortals. So too was the legacy of its god, vast, strange, and full of contradictions. Poseidon's children were as numerous and varied as the currents of the ocean itself. Some shone with heroism, others embodied chaos. In their stories, one could glimpse fragments of their father's nature, his passion, his pride, his unpredictability, and his strange, fierce love. Poseidon did not sire offspring merely for the sake of dominion. To him, each child was an extension of the sea, a reflection of its moods, a ripple of its power. Where Zeus sought heirs for Olympus, and Hades guarded his realm in solitude, Poseidon's line stretched outward in all directions, touching every shore and legend. Among his divine children, The first and most famous was Triton, born of Amphitrite, a prince of the deep and herald of the sea. Triton's upper body was that of a man, but his lower half coiled into the tail of a fish, scales shimmering like turquoise glass. He carried a great conch shell, through which he could calm or summon storms. His call was the voice of the ocean itself, soft as a lullaby when the seas slept, and deafening as thunder when anger rose. Triton dwelled beside his father in the palace beneath the waves, guarding its gates and guiding its guests. Mortals who glimpsed him near the surface mistook him for a spirit of music, for his songs carried across miles of open water. But to those who defied the sea, his horn was a warning. He once blew it so fiercely that the giants fled from the battlefield of the gods, their roars drowned by the echo of the ocean's cry. Next among Poseidon's children were the Nereids, the 50 daughters of the sea who danced in coral gardens and guided sailors through treacherous passages. Though often called daughters of Nereus, they served Poseidon as his courtiers and messengers, born of his favour and touched by his spirit. Their laughter could charm dolphins, their tears could calm tempests. Among them was Thetis, destined to bear Achilles, a hero whose glory and tragedy were equal in measure. Through her, Poseidon's blood would flow into mortal veins, weaving oceanic power into the tapestry of human destiny. There were darker offspring too, children of his anger and of his brief, consuming unions with spirits of chaos and mortal women alike. From these came monsters and marvels alike, reminders that the sea's gifts are never without peril. One such child was Polyphemus, the Cyclops who lived upon a lonely island, his single eye gleaming like a storm lantern. Born of Poseidon and the sea nymph Thoosa, he was both mighty and monstrous. His voice could shake cliffs, and his strength was the echo of his father's trident. Yet his heart, though fierce, was not cruel. When Odysseus blinded him, it was not only pain that filled his roar, but heartbreak, for the god within him recognized betrayal as deeply as his father once had. Poseidon's vengeance on Odysseus was not only divine justice, but a father's wrath for a wounded child. Another was Charybdis, born of Poseidon and Gaia, a monstrous whirlpool that devoured entire ships. Once she had been a sea nymph who loved her father's tides too fiercely, stealing land to feed the ocean. Zeus punished her for upsetting the balance, binding her to the sea floor. There she remained, opening her jaws thrice a day to swallow the waves and spew them forth again, a living tide, feared by sailors for millennia. And beside her dwelled Scylla, who was once a nymph beloved by Poseidon's realm but transformed by jealousy into a creature of horror, six-headed and shrieking. Her beauty turned to nightmare. From the meeting of divinity and mortal grace came heroes half-human, half-seaborn, who carried the echo of Poseidon's might into the world of men. Among them was Theseus, son of Poseidon and Aethra, princess of Trozen. His conception was shrouded in divine mystery, for on the night Aethra lay with the mortal king Aegeus, Poseidon too claimed her in secret. When Theseus grew to manhood, his strength, courage, and uncanny sense of direction, as if the sea itself whispered to him, revealed his divine blood. It was Poseidon who steadied his hand when he slew the Minotaur, and Poseidon's waves that guided him safely home. Yet, as often with gods, even love carried sorrow. When Theseus forgot to change his sails from black to white, the signal to his mortal father that he lived, Aegeus cast himself into the sea. The water that caught him was Poseidon's own. The Aegean Sea still bears his name, forever a reminder of how love, grief, and the sea are bound by tragedy. Among Poseidon's more mysterious children was Pegasus, born from the blood of Medusa, as her spirit touched the sea. A creature of impossible beauty, the winged horse embodied both the ocean's grace and its freedom. Poseidon watched with quiet pride as Pegasus rose from the foam, his hooves striking sparks of lightning wherever he flew. "He is mine," the god said softly, "and yet he belongs to the sky." It was as if Poseidon's longing to unite heaven and sea had taken shape in that creature's flight. Not all his progeny were blessed. Some bore his rage, others his loneliness. The Telshines, a race of sea spirits said to be Poseidon's children, were masters of magic and metallurgy. They created wonders, crafting weapons for gods and jewels for queens. But their pride turned dark, and they misused their gifts to curse and corrupt. In sorrow, Poseidon drowned them, their islands sinking beneath his waves. Yet even this destruction carried the seed of rebirth from their remains. Coral reefs grew, transforming punishment into beauty. The god's mortal descendants spread across Greece like tides reaching every shore. Kings and heroes traced their lineage to him, claiming his blessing for courage, wisdom, and the mastery of ships. The fishermen of Naxos called themselves his children, believing that the salt in their veins was proof of divine blood. The horse-tamers of Corinth swore that their steeds moved with Poseidon's rhythm. To the Spartans, his strength was the source of their endurance. To the Athenians, his storms were lessons in humility. Poseidon himself regarded his children with a mixture of pride and melancholy. Each embodied a fragment of his soul, yet none could contain his full essence. When he looked upon Triton, he saw his nobility. In Charybdis, his power. In Theseus, his valor. In Pegasus, his longing for transcendence. And in his monstrous offspring, he saw the truth that every creation, divine or mortal, carries its shadow. Amphitrite once asked him, "Do you love them all, even those who bring pain?" Poseidon's gaze was distant, his trident resting across his knees. "The sea loves all it touches," he said. "It does not choose between calm and storm. To love the ocean is to accept both." And Stells, when mortals prayed for calm seas, they often forgot that beneath those gentle waves lay the bones of heroes and monsters alike, Poseidon's children, sleeping in the silence of the deep. Sailors claimed that when lightning struck the horizon and the sea glowed briefly gold, the god was thinking of them, the lost, the brave, the cursed. His offspring were not merely beings. They were the ocean's stories made flesh. Every whirlpool, every breaking wave, every galloping horse was their echo. Through them, Poseidon's legacy stretched across myth and time. His name carried wherever water touched the world. And as the centuries passed, new tales would rise, of floods and temples, of worship and warning, proving that the god's blood, once spilled into creation, could never truly fade. The great flood of Deucalion. There are times when the world forgets its maker, when pride blinds mortals to the balance that keeps creation whole. In those times, even the gods grow weary, and the sea begins to stir with judgment. The story of the great flood, the deluge that cleansed the world of arrogance, is not merely one of destruction. It is a story of sorrow, of mercy, and of Poseidon's reluctant hand in the resetting of the earth. Long had humankind walked the land, growing bold under the blessings of Olympus. "Brother," she said, "will you destroy what honors us both?" He stared at her, the trident still humming with power. "Mortals forget balance," he said. "They give wisdom to the sky and leave the sea empty-handed." Athena's voice softened. "Then teach them balance, not fear." Her words disarmed him. He lowered the trident, and the waters receded, leaving behind a pool of salt at the temple's heart, a symbol of his presence. Eternal yet contained, kings declared themselves divine. Priests sold the sea's blessings for gold, and sailors mocked the storms that once filled them with awe. Greed festered, cruelty spread. The oceans, though vast, could not wash away their corruption. The sky grew heavy with watching. Zeus, looking down from Olympus, felt disgust burn in his chest. "They have forgotten," he said to the assembly of gods. "They poison the air with their arrogance. The earth groans beneath them." He turned to Poseidon, whose trident glimmered faintly in the dim hall. "Brother," he said, "your waves are patient, but patience cannot cleanse this." Poseidon did not answer at once. His gaze wandered to the horizon where the sea met the stars. "The ocean gives," he said finally. But it also takes. It has always known when to renew itself. Hades, shadowed in silence, spoke next. If the world must die, let it be done cleanly. No war, no fire. Let the waters wash the land, and the dead come to me in peace. Zeus nodded. The gods agreed. So began the greatest storm in mortal memory, the flood that would sweep across continents and leave only silence behind. Poseidon did not strike in anger. He rose from his throne with a heaviness that dimmed the ocean's glow. The sea creatures stilled, sensing the shift in their master's heart. When he lifted his trident, the world shuddered. With a single thrust, he split the sea floor, and from its wounds rose torrents of water that reached the sky. Rivers burst their banks, lakes overflowed, and the waves clawed their way across the land. Zeus answered from above, splitting the heavens with thunder. Rain poured for days without end, and the sea and sky became one a grey, unbroken eternity. Mountains vanished beneath the flood. Cities dissolved like sandcastles, for they knew that in the endless play of rivalry and power, of creation and destruction, it was the sea that endured. Poseidon's children of legend, the sea is not a barren realm. It teems with life both known and unseen, filled with creatures that defy the imagination of mortals. So too was the legacy of its god, vast, strange, and full of contradictions. Poseidon's children were as numerous and varied as the currents of the ocean itself. Some shone with heroism, others embodied chaos. Sailors would wake from their hammocks and stare out into the dark, sensing something vast moving beneath their ships. A single ripple would pass through the water, smooth, circular, like a god's touch, and then, faintly, they would hear it. A sound not of wind or whale or wave, but of breath deep and slow, as if the ocean itself exhaled. Those who heard it would kneel and whisper thanks. They knew the sign. Poseidon had passed, inspecting his domain. As the first drops fell, he and Pyrrha gathered what they could: food, seeds, sacred fire, and prayers. They built a great chest, sealing themselves within it. When the flood came, their vessel rose upon the waters like a single leaf in an endless storm. Poseidon watched them drift. Amid the chaos, the sight moved him, two small figures clinging to hope as the world dissolved. He guided the currents subtly, steering their ark away from the whirlpools and rocks. Even in judgment, he could not extinguish compassion. "Let them live," he whispered to the waves. "Let them remember." For 9 days and nights, the waters ruled. The sun vanished, the stars drowned, and even Olympus seemed adrift in mist. Then, at last, Zeus grew weary of destruction. He sent Hermes to command Poseidon, "Cease the flood. Enough has been washed away." Poseidon obeyed. He raised his trident high, and the seas began to retreat. The clouds broke apart, releasing a single beam of light that struck the ark as it drifted toward a mountain's peak. Deucalion and Pyrrha stepped out upon solid ground, trembling beneath the vast silence that followed. Around them stretched a new world, clean, empty, waiting. They knelt upon the wet earth and offered thanks. "O mighty Poseidon," Deucalion prayed, "you who spared us when all others fell, teach us how to begin again." For a moment, there was only the whisper of receding waves. Then the sea itself seemed to speak, a voice low and deep, like wind across stone. "Honor balance," it said. "Remember that creation is born from destruction, and that the waters which give life can also take it." Deucalion and Pyrrha obeyed. Guided by divine will, they cast stones behind them as they walked, and from those stones sprang new men and women, born of the earth and cleansed by the sea. Humanity began anew, wiser, humbler, forever marked by the memory of the flood. Poseidon returned to his realm, the waters stilling around him. His palace, once dimmed with sorrow, began to glow again with the dance of light upon its walls. The sea creatures stirred, their songs returning. He looked into the distance, and saw the reborn lands glimmering beneath the sun, the rivers flowing once more into his embrace. But in the deepest trenches of the ocean lay the remnants of the old world cities lost, statues toppled, and bones gleaming pale in the sand. Poseidon did not hide them. He kept them as reminders, relics of a time when arrogance had drowned the world. To this day, sailors speak of those ruined sunken temples glimpsed in clear waters, the ghosts of civilizations that vanished beneath the flood. They call them Atlantis, Aigai, or names long forgotten. But the sea remembers, and so does its god. Even the gods, it is said, were humbled by the flood. Zeus grew quieter, Hades more contemplative, and Poseidon more patient, for he had seen both the folly and the resilience of mortals. They would err again of that, he was certain, but they would also love, build, and dream, and when they did, the sea would be there, eternal as memory, to cradle and to test them. From that age onward, every storm carried the whisper of the flood, a reminder that the ocean does not rage without reason. It cleanses what must be cleansed. It spares what must endure. And Poseidon, lord of that vast and shifting boundary between life and death, remained forever its keeper, the god who, even in wrath, could not help but grieve for the world he had drowned. When mortals looked upon calm waters and saw their own reflection, they saw also the echo of his mercy. For beneath that peace lay an ocean's sorrow, the tears of the god who once wept as he remade the world. Temples, priests, and sailors' prayers. After the great flood receded, and the land bloomed once more beneath a cleansed sky, humankind looked upon the world with reverence renewed. They remembered the roaring waves, the endless rain, the mercy that had spared a few. And though fear still lingered like salt on their tongues, that fear grew into devotion. From the edges of every coastline, from islands scattered like pearls upon the sea, they began to build not ships or cities, but sanctuaries. Temples rose where the ocean's spray touched the cliffs, and the name they carved upon every altar was Poseidon. The people knew now that the sea was not merely a force to be survived, but a god to be honored, the keeper of tides, the giver and taker of all life. Where once they had cursed the storms, now they knelt to them, for the sea was both cradle and grave. The first of these temples stood at Isthmia, near Corinth, where the waters of two seas nearly met. There, travellers from every corner of Greece gathered to honour the god who bound their world together. The sanctuary was built from white marble veined with blue, so that it shimmered like the surface of the sea. Its columns were carved to resemble waves caught in motion, their crests frozen in stone. In the centre stood a statue of Poseidon, immense and radiant, his trident raised, his gaze both calm and commanding. The priests of Isthmia served not as kings but as stewards of the sea's rhythm. Each dawn they walked barefoot to the water's edge, carrying amphorae of olive oil and wine. With solemn precision they poured the offerings into the surf, whispering the morning prayer that every mariner came to know by heart. O earth shaker, tamer of waves, keeper of depth and drift, let our keels cut your waters clean, let our sails drink your breath. To you we return all that we take. Fishermen sang this prayer before casting their nets. Sailors murmured it before voyages. Even shepherds whispered it when the clouds gathered dark and low over the hills. It became a rhythm of life, a promise of respect to the god whose temper no mortal could survive. Every 5 years, the Isthmian Games were held in Poseidon's honour. Athletes, poets, and warriors came from across the Aegean to compete, their contests blessed by the sound of waves crashing nearby. The sea wind carried the scent of salt and pine through the amphitheatre as chariots thundered down the track and wrestlers grappled like breakers against stone. Victors did not receive gold or silver, but wreaths of wild celery, green and humble, a reminder that glory fades, but the sea endures. Poseidon himself was said to attend, unseen but felt. When the waves rose high and glittered with sunlight, the priests would smile and say, "The god is pleased." When fog rolled in thick and silent, the crowds grew hushed, for it meant his attention had turned elsewhere towards storms, perhaps, or prayers left unanswered. Beyond Greece, his worship spread like the tide. Along the coastlines of Asia Minor, the islands of the Cyclades, and the farthest harbours of the west, his temples multiplied. The sailors of Rhodes called him Poseidon Asphaleos, the steadfast one, protector against shipwreck. In Aegae, he was Poseidon Aigeos, god of the deep sea and earthquakes, whose palace lay beneath their bay. In Sparta, he was Poseidon Hippios, lord of horses and swift motion. To each city, he was a different face of the same mystery, an ever-changing god, like the sea itself, but his worship was not confined to marble and ritual. The true altars of Poseidon were built of salt and wind, upon the decks of ships that braved his dominion. Every sailor, from the humblest fisherman to the proudest admiral, knew that a voyage began not with the setting of sails, but with a whisper to the waves. Before departure, the captain would stand at the prow, holding a cup of unmixed wine. As the dawn broke, he would pour it into the water, saying, "To the one who guides and guards." Only then would the oars strike water. And when storms rose, when the sea darkened and the wind tore at the sails, men shouted his name above the thunder, begging him to remember their offerings. Some promised him treasures if they lived, others promised temples. But Poseidon's mercy was never bought, only earned through humility. It was said that those who honored him truly could hear his presence in the rhythm of the waves. Old sailors spoke of nights when the sea turned still, the air warm and electric, and a deep hum rolled through the hull of their ships, a sound like the heartbeat of the world. They called it Poseidon's pulse, the moment when the god brushed his realm with unseen hands. The priests taught that every wave was a word of prayer, every tide a gesture of devotion. They believed that when a sailor died at sea, his soul did not wander the underworld, but sank gently into the god's embrace. The sea keeps its own, they said, and Poseidon forgets no name. To those who perished beneath the waves, no tomb was needed. The ocean itself was their grave, their shroud, their hymn. Not all worshippers came from seafaring cities. Inland towns, fearing earthquakes, offered sacrifices to calm the earth-shaker's temper. At shrines carved into cliffs or built beside rivers, they burned incense of pine and amber. When tremors shook the ground, they ran to the altars, crying, "Be still, Lord of depths." For they knew that his power reached beyond the sea, that even the earth itself trembled to his rhythm. In some places, rituals grew older than words. On the island of Tenos, fishermen cast miniature ships made of wax into the tide as offerings. In Euboea, they built underwater altars and swam down to place garlands of seaweed upon them. At sunrise, the priests of Delos waded knee-deep into the surf, singing hymns that echoed through the islands. From foam you rose, from silence you speak, keeper of whales and wild winds alike. Spare the shores of men, for we are your children, and our hearts beat in your tide. Poseidon watched these rituals from his throne of coral, his expression unreadable. Sometimes, when the prayers were pure and the sacrifices made with love, the sea grew calm for weeks, and dolphins followed ships like blessings come alive. Other times, when arrogance returned and temples fell to greed, the god's patience thinned. Then came tempests swift, unrelenting reminders that reverence must never be hollow. Amphitrite, ever gentle, once asked him, "Do their prayers comfort you?" He gazed through the palace walls, where sunlight filtered down from the surface like gold dust. "Their prayers are like the waves," he said. "Each one fades, yet together they never cease. They remind me that I am not forgotten." It was true. He simply smiled, his eyes as deep as the ocean floor. "Take the mountain," he said. "I will keep the sea and every reflection of your light within it." From that day, Apollo ruled Delphi, but the oracle's waters remained touched by Poseidon's essence. Every prophecy that rose from its depths carried the whisper of the sea, a reminder that truth, like water, flows from darkness before reaching light. Not all rivalries ended in peace. Sailors shared tales of storms survived. Lovers prayed for the return of those lost at sea, and kings offered treasures in exchange for victory on distant waters. In every story, the god loomed vast and unchanging, sometimes merciful, sometimes cold, but always present. The poet's ocean and the philosopher's sea. In the ages that followed, when the echo of temples faded into the hum of waves and empires rose along the Mediterranean shore, Poseidon remained. No mortal empire, however grand, could outlast the sea that birthed it. And so poets, philosophers, and travelers turned their minds toward him, seeking to understand what he was, not only as a god, but as a mystery older than belief itself. To the poets, Poseidon was the great metaphor of existence, the restless rhythm that pulsed through all creation. They wrote that the sea's endless motion mirrored the human heart, forever shifting between calm and storm, love and anger, hope and despair. In their verses, he was not simply a deity with a trident. He was time, emotion, and memory made liquid. Homer, the blind singer who stitched the dawn of myth into song, called him Enosigaios, the earth shaker. In the Iliad, the sea god's rage mirrored the turmoil of men at war. When Poseidon rose from the depths to aid the Greeks, the earth itself trembled. He strode upon the sea, Homer sang, and beneath his immortal feet the waves rejoiced. To Homer, Poseidon was the uncontainable energy that moved both gods and mortals. He was not cruel, he was inevitable. But it was in the Odyssey that Poseidon's nature deepened. There he became not merely a god of storms, but the embodiment of consequence. Odysseus's long suffering under the god's hand was the poet's way of telling humankind that wisdom is bought only through humility, that no man may call himself master of fate while the ocean still exists. In the end, when Poseidon relents and allows the wanderer home, the sea's mercy becomes a symbol of cosmic forgiveness. The poets who followed Homer expanded that vision. Hesiod, in his Theogony, described Poseidon as both creator and destroyer, father of rivers and horses, tamer of chaos. Pindar, in his Odes, sang of the god as the source of rhythm and movement, the divine musician whose waves kept time with the beating of the cosmos. He compared Poseidon's trident to the lyre of Apollo. One struck the earth, the other the air. Yet both played in harmony. Even the dramatists, those masters of tragedy, could not resist the pull of the sea. For though mortals would build temples to countless gods, it was Poseidon's name they cried when life hung by a thread, when ships cracked, when thunder rolled, when the earth itself betrayed them. They feared him more deeply than they loved him, and yet, in that fear, they found devotion more honest than any hymn. As centuries passed, the temples of Poseidon became places not only of worship but of gathering. Heraclitus, who taught that all things flow, pointed to the sea as proof of his doctrine. The ocean is both life and death, he said, and its lord both gives and takes without distinction. To stand before it is to know the balance of the world. Plato, whose mind sought the forms behind all forms, turned to the sea when he dreamed of Atlantis. In his dialogues, he spoke of a mighty island civilization that angered the gods through pride, and how Poseidon's wrath sank it beneath the waves. Odysseus's long suffering under the god's hand was the poet's way of telling humankind that wisdom is bought only through humility, that no man may call himself master of fate while the ocean still exists. In the end, when Poseidon relents and allows the wanderer home, the sea's mercy becomes a symbol of cosmic forgiveness. The poets who followed Homer expanded that vision. Hesiod, in his Theogony, described Poseidon as both creator and destroyer, father of rivers and horses, tamer of chaos. Perhaps the god of the sea is no tyrant, but reason itself unseen, but ever present. Thus, in the philosopher's mind, Poseidon became not a myth, but a metaphor for the order that underlies chaos. The Stoics, too, found in the sea a reflection of their creed. To them, virtue was to accept the rhythm of the world without resistance, to be calm in storm and tranquil in calm. They taught their students to look upon the ocean and remember that life, like water, cannot be mastered, only understood. The god who ruled it, therefore, was not to be feared, but revered as the ultimate teacher. To live according to nature, said the Stoic Cleanthes, is to live as the sea lives, deep, unending, and ever in motion. Yet for all the philosopher's wisdom, it was the poets who captured Poseidon's soul most faithfully. They saw beauty where reason saw law. To them, he was not an abstraction, but a presence, the shimmer of light on water, the hum of waves against stone, the breath of salt on the wind. They spoke of him as lovers speak of memory, distant, endless, always returning. In one fragment of Sappho she writes, "O Poseidon, whose hands are cool wind and foam, let my heart be a wave, rising to meet your calm." It is a simple prayer, but within it lies the essence of the god, both lover and destroyer, both serenity and storm. The sea's influence seeped into the imaginations of thinkers beyond Greece. The Egyptians saw in their river's flood a reflection of Poseidon's moods, though they named him differently. The Phoenicians, whose lives depended upon trade, called him the eternal mariner, god of guidance and renewal. Even in lands far from the sea, travelers spoke of a power that moved the winds and shaped the rain, a distant echo of the ocean's pulse. The sea's influence seeped into the imaginations of thinkers beyond Greece. The Egyptians saw in their river's flood a reflection of Poseidon's moods, though they named him differently. The Phoenicians, whose lives depended upon trade, called him the eternal mariner, god of guidance and renewal. Even in lands far from the sea, travelers spoke of a power that moved the winds and shaped the rain, a distant echo of the ocean's pulse. The sculptors understood something the philosophers could not, that stillness in Poseidon was always the illusion of motion restrained. Painters too sought his essence. On the walls of temples and the mosaics of villas, he appeared emerging from the deep in a chariot drawn by hippocamps, half horse, half fish, surrounded by dolphins and nymphs. The sea around him glowed not with terror, but with light, as if creation itself rose with him. Every brushstroke was an attempt to capture the moment between fury and peace. To the ordinary man, the farmer, the sailor, the poet's listener, Poseidon was not a philosophy, but a presence felt in every drop of rain and every quake beneath the soil. When the ground trembled, he whispered, "He walks." When the waves glittered with morning sun, they said, "He smiles." And when the sea withdrew before a great wave, they fell silent, knowing the god was drawing breath. Temples and statues might crumble, but stories endure longer than stone. As the old world gave way to new empires, Poseidon's image changed but never vanished. The Romans called him Neptune, painting him not as a wild destroyer but as a dignified ruler, the symbol of an empire's dominion over the sea. Yet even under the Latin name, his essence remained the same power held in restraint, danger balanced by beauty. Poets of Rome, Virgil, Ovid, and Seneca reimagined him for their world. Through the ages, the philosophers of later centuries, from the scholars of Alexandria to the mystics of Byzantium, saw in Poseidon the eternal struggle between knowledge and mystery. They said that to understand him fully was to drown, for knowledge of the infinite could not be borne by finite minds. The sea, one Alexandrian monk wrote, is scripture written in motion. Each wave is a word of God, and Poseidon the ink that shapes it. In time, faiths shifted and new gods rose. As centuries turned, artists carved his likeness into marble and bronze. In the workshops of Athens and Syracuse, sculptors shaped him standing tall, trident in hand, muscles tense as if forever on the verge of motion. Unlike Zeus, whose thunderbolt froze the air, Poseidon's form seemed to breathe a god captured between two tides, his hair flowing like seaweed, his eyes carved with a faint sadness. To the thinkers of later ages, the philosophers of Rome and beyond, Poseidon became the ultimate paradox, both symbol of chaos and proof of divine order. The Stoic Epictetus once told his students, "When the sea rages, do not curse Poseidon. The storm obeys its law as surely as the calm. Learn from the sea that the universe has no malice, only motion." And in that insight lies the key to his eternal image. The poets saw beauty in the storm, the philosophers saw truth. Both were right, yet the sea never ceased to move, and so Poseidon was never truly forgotten. Sailors of every faith still whispered to him, though they named him differently, Saint Nicholas, protector of mariners, the nameless spirit of the deep. They still poured wine into the water, still crossed themselves before storms, still kissed the deck upon surviving them. For even when his temples crumbled and his statues fell, the ocean itself remained his greatest monument. For in every tide, in every trembling of the earth, in every reflection of moonlight upon water, Poseidon endures not merely as a god, but as the embodiment of all that is both eternal and ever-changing. The poets still dream of him, the philosophers still quote him without knowing it, and every child who listens to the ocean's roar still hears his voice, and the sea his oldest poem continues to write. Poseidon in the age of heroes. As centuries rolled over the horizon, and the age of gods began to mingle with the dawn of mortals, a new rhythm swept through the world, a rhythm of human courage, echoing divine power. It was the age of heroes, when the children of gods walked the earth, and Poseidon's name thundered across every shore. His blood flowed in the veins of kings, sailors, and warriors alike, and his hand guided their fates with the patience of tides. From the foam and salt of his realm rose legends that would never fade, tales of mortals touched by the sea god's will, of voyages that tested man's heart against the vast unknown. In this age, Poseidon was no longer only the earth-shaker or storm-bringer. He was the unseen ally of explorers, the patron of courage, and sometimes the quiet architect of destiny. The first of his chosen was Jason, captain of the Argo, who set forth to find the golden fleece. For Poseidon's domain was never just the ocean, it was all that moves, all that changes, all that lives between peace and turmoil. Even now, when one stands at the edge of the sea and watches the horizon blur into the sky, one can feel it, that pull of awe and fear, the ancient memory of a power too vast to name. The waves whisper the same lesson they whispered to sailors of old, that life, like the sea, can never be mastered, only respected. The poets later said that the god walked unseen beside their vessel, guiding them through tempests and monsters. Even when they sailed between the twin terrors of Scylla and Charybdis, it was his mercy that tilted the balance. "Let them pass," he murmured into the deep, and the whirlpool held its breath. Jason returned victorious, though his tale ended in sorrow. Still, the Argonaut's voyage became a hymn to human daring, proof that the sea god did not only punish pride, but also rewarded courage tempered by reverence. Another of Poseidon's mortal sons was Perseus, whose story began with prophecy and peril. Born of Danae, who was locked away by her father to escape a vision of doom, Perseus was conceived when Zeus came to her as golden rain. Yet Poseidon's presence, too, surrounded the hero's path. When Perseus set forth to slay Medusa, one of the sea god's own cursed creations, the ocean trembled with conflicted feeling. Medusa had once been a maiden sacred to Poseidon, and her curse a punishment born of divine jealousy. When Perseus lifted his sword, the sea sighed. From Medusa's blood and the god's tears arose Pegasus, the winged horse-child of Poseidon's love and loss. The creature's wings flashed like waves under sunlight. His hooves struck sparks of sea foam wherever he landed. The ship itself was a gift from the gods, built of oak, from Zeus's sacred grove, yet it was Poseidon who breathed life into its voyage. When Jason's oarsmen pushed away from the shore, the sea lay calm and silver under morning light, as if the god had stilled his hand in silent blessing. Throughout their perilous journey, the Argonauts whispered prayers to the sea. When storms rose, they poured oil upon the waters. When waves chased them, they shouted Poseidon's name until the fury ceased. When Theseus grew to manhood, he found his destiny calling him across the Aegean to Crete, where the Minotaur devoured youth and hope alike. The maze beneath the palace of Knossos was born of Poseidon's anger at King Minos, who had once defied him. Yet the god's justice would be balanced by redemption. Guided by Athena's wisdom and by the sea's favor, Theseus entered the labyrinth and slew the monster, ending the curse born of broken vows. When he sailed home, Poseidon calmed the waters, but fate demanded a lesson even for heroes. Theseus forgot to change his sails from black to white, the sign to his father that he lived. King Aegeus, seeing the dark sails approach, threw himself into the sea in despair. The water caught him gently, naming itself forever after his loss, the Aegean Sea. Poseidon watched, sorrow and wisdom mingling in his gaze. "Even victory carries grief," he murmured, "for the sea claims what pride forgets." Perseus mounted him and soared into legend, and Poseidon, watching from the depths, whispered, "Fly well, child of the tide." But of all Poseidon's sons, none carried his essence more fully than Theseus, the prince who would become king of Athens. His birth was a secret of both land and sea. On the night Aethra conceived him, she dreamed that the god of the ocean rose from the waves and placed a trident of light upon her brow, blessing her womb. When Heracles later cleansed the Augean stables by turning rivers through them, mortals said Poseidon lent strength to the waters, allowing them to wash away corruption, an act both symbolic and divine. And when Bellerophon sought to tame Pegasus, it was Poseidon's name he whispered. The winged horse, born of the god's essence, refused all mortal hands until Bellerophon knelt beside the sea and prayed. "Lord of the deep," he said, "if I am worthy, let me ride what is yours." The Blyson eyes. The god's influence stretched far beyond Greece. Every voyage across the Mediterranean bore his unseen hand. When Heracles, the mightiest of heroes, crossed the ocean to fetch the cattle of Geryon, Poseidon watched the demigod's ship disappear beyond the sunset. Heracles was not his son, yet the god admired his endurance, that relentless defiance against all odds. He sent dolphins to guide the hero through dark waters and stilled storms that might have drowned him. When Theseus grew to manhood, he found his destiny calling him across the Aegean to Crete, where the Minotaur devoured youth and hope alike. The maze beneath the palace of Knossos was born of Poseidon's anger at King Minos, who had once defied him. Yet the god's justice would be balanced by redemption. Guided by Athena's wisdom and by the sea's favor, Theseus entered the labyrinth and slew the monster, ending the curse born of broken vows. The sea became the proving ground of character. To cross, it was to confront chaos and return reborn. Every ship that left the harbor carried not just cargo, but faith. Faith that the god who ruled both destruction and mercy would allow them to see another sunrise. But even as he guided heroes, Poseidon remained apart. The sea's patience was not infinite. When arrogance returned as it always did, his temper rose like a squall. In the story of King Polybotes, who defied the gods during the Gigantomachy, Poseidon's wrath reached mythic scale. He tore a mountain from the earth and hurled it upon the rebel, pinning him forever beneath it. The island that rose from that act became Nisairos, still trembling with fire, a living scar of divine anger. Yet balance endured. The same god who crushed giants also rescued sailors and blessed lovers who prayed beneath moonlit waves. He sent gentle breezes to guide Orpheus when the poet sailed to retrieve his lost wife. He lifted ships home when warriors wept for peace. He gave voice to springs that cooled burning lands, saying, "Even wrath must end in calm." For Poseidon understood that the sea is not eternal war, it is eternal motion. His children, the heroes, were living tides, rising and falling, each carrying fragments of his will. Through them, the ocean learned to speak in human form, to dream through mortal eyes. In the twilight of that age, when the line between gods and men began to fade, Poseidon looked upon the world with quiet reflection. Olympus still gleamed, but fewer mortals gazed upward in prayer. They looked to the horizon instead, following the pull of their own ambition. Ships grew larger, empires vaster. The gods' temples were filled with offerings, yet fewer hearts truly understood what they gave. Amphitrite once asked him, as they stood before the endless dark, "Do you miss the age when mortals knew your name as fear?" Poseidon's reply was slow, the tone of a tide withdrawing. "Fear is a shallow wave. Reverence runs deeper. They no longer tremble when they see the sea, they trust it. Perhaps that, too, is a kind of worship." He lifted his trident and touched the ocean floor. From its point rose bubbles that shimmered like stars. "They will forget me," he said, "but they will not forget this, the rhythm I placed in their hearts. Every ship that sails, every story told of courage, carries me." Above him, the surface of the water brightened with moonlight. Somewhere far away, a hero's oar struck the sea, steady and sure. The sound echoed through the deep, a heartbeat, ancient and familiar. Poseidon smiled. The age of heroes would fade, as all ages must, but its spirit would endure wherever waves kissed the shore. And so the god watched them go, Jason, Perseus, Theseus, Heracles, each a ripple in the endless tide. Through their triumphs and their tragedies, humanity had learned what the sea had always known, that power and humility, courage and surrender were not opposites but reflections. In their legends, Poseidon's presence became quieter, less visible yet more profound. He no longer needed to appear in thunder and foam. His will was woven into the nature of adventure itself. Every voyage was his prayer, every return his blessing. As the last of the great heroes vanished into myth, Poseidon's gaze turned inward. He sensed a change coming, an age when gods would retreat and men would claim the world for their own. But he did not grieve. He was the sea. He had seen dawn and dusk countless times. And long after Olympus grew silent, the ocean would continue to speak his name. For even when the gods themselves became stories, Poseidon would remain eternal not because of temples or worship, but because every tide, every storm, every heartbeat of the world still moved to his rhythm. Twilight of the old gods. The age of heroes ended as quietly as the ebb of a tide. One by one, the bright names that had filled the songs of Greece, Perseus, Theseus, Jason, Heracles, faded into memory. The demigods were gone, their mortal blood too fragile to sustain eternity. In their place came empires, vast and proud, whose ships ruled the seas and whose rulers claimed to rival Olympus itself. The gods still watched from their sacred peaks, but the prayers grew fewer, their temples more silent. The world was changing, and even the immortals felt the slow chill of time. Poseidon felt it first. For the sea is older than stone, older even than the stars that guide sailors across its skin, and it senses every shift in the balance of the world. The tides moved the same as always, but their rhythm was no longer answered by the beating of countless hearts calling his name. The altars built on cliffs began to crumble. The priests of Isthmia grew old with few successors. Marble faded beneath the salt of neglect. He did not rage. Instead, he listened to the hush that follows thunder, to the strange stillness that comes when a wave breaks for the last time. Amphitrite, his queen, stood beside him in the coral-lit throne room, her eyes reflecting the vast blue sorrow of their domain. "They have turned their faces from us," she whispered. Poseidon's answer was calm as the depths. "No," he said, "they have turned toward themselves. The sea is still within them, They cannot banish what they carry in their blood. Above, mortals began to name new gods, or none at all. Philosophers replaced faith with reason. Sailors studied the stars and the winds, charting courses not through prayer but through geometry. They still poured libations before a voyage, but more out of habit than belief. The world was becoming louder, more certain of its own power, and yet, in that certainty, lonelier. Zeus too felt the change. Olympus, once bright with immortal laughter, had grown subdued. The feasts were fewer. The halls echoed with memories. One evening, as the clouds turned crimson with sunset, the sky god summoned his brothers. Hades rose from the earth in a shroud of shadow, and Poseidon emerged from the sea in a storm's reflection, trident in hand. Together they stood on the summit of Olympus, gazing upon the fading light of their dominion. "The age of belief ends," Zeus said. His voice was not angry, only weary. Men build their cities and their laws. They no longer tremble before lightning, buys, nor before the sea, Poseidon added, with a trace of wry pride. "Perhaps we taught them too well." Hades gave a rare smile. "They will return. All things end in darkness, and what is darkness but remembrance?" Zeus turned to Poseidon. "Will you fight it? Will you stir the waves to remind them?" Poseidon looked out over the horizon, where the Aegean glimmered gold beneath the dying sun. "No, a storm cannot bring back what the tide has already taken. Let them forget our names, if they must. They will still call to the ocean when they fear. They will still stand upon its edge and feel small. That is enough." For a moment, the brothers were silent. Three forces that had shaped the world, now watching it drift beyond their reach. Then Zeus lifted his hand, and lightning arced once more across the heavens, brief and beautiful. "Then let us fade with dignity," he said. Poseidon returned to his realm, and the years passed as waves pass, indistinguishable, infinite. He wandered his palace in thought, his trident leaning against the coral steps, its glow dimmer than before. Around him, the Nereids still danced, but their laughter carried a melancholy note. Even Triton, his loyal son, had grown quiet, blowing his conch less often, as though the sea itself had forgotten its own music. One night, as the moon hung low and full above the dark water, Poseidon ascended to the surface. He broke through into air still warm with summer, his hair streaming like kelp. The world had changed utterly. On distant shores, lights flickered, not torches, but fires trapped in glass, unmoving, unbreathing. Ships of wood and sail were gone, replaced by black silhouettes of iron and smoke. Their engines rumbled like imprisoned thunder. Their hulls cut the sea without fear. He drifted closer, unseen, and listened. The sailors on these new vessels spoke of currents, of depths, of pressure. They spoke with the language of mastery, not of prayer. And yet, when the wind howled and waves struck steel, one still muttered, "God help us." Poseidon smiled faintly. "He does," he said to no one. "He always does." He moved across the oceans, unseen by mortals but felt in every storm. He watched the rise of nations whose flags whipped like foam in the wind. He saw men dig into the ocean floor, drawing fire from beneath his domain. He saw them launch their machines into the air, crossing what once belonged to the sky alone. Each innovation carried the same pulse, the ancient hunger to know, to conquer, to move forward. In that, Poseidon found something familiar. Once, he too had fought for dominion, carving his kingdom from the chaos of the primordial deep. These mortals, reckless and brave, were echoes of that old struggle. He could not despise them, but their courage was fragile, for it lacked reverence. They thought themselves gods, yet feared the smallest wave when the engines failed. Sometimes, when storms grew too wild, Poseidon rose to calm them, not in mercy, but in memory of what they once were, creatures who had looked upon the sea and seen the divine. Other times, he let the waves speak without restraint, reminding them that they sailed upon his skin. Whole fleets vanished into the dark, and when the wreckage sank, the god whispered, "Remember, he's what militing two vies." In the quiet centuries, as faith gave way to knowledge and myth to history, Poseidon began to retreat deeper into the ocean. The world above grew bright with the light of progress, but the deep remained untouched, its silence absolute. Down there, amid forests of coral and ruins of drowned cities, the god found peace. His palace still glimmered, lit by creatures that carried their own stars. Amphitrite sang softly beside him, and the sea moved to her rhythm. "Do they still tell stories of us?" she asked one night, her voice as soft as foam breaking on sand. "Some do," he said, "but their stories are different now. They say we are symbols. They say we are imagination. Perhaps that is what we have always been. Does that sadden you?" Poseidon thought for a long time. "No," he said at last. "It means we endure in another form. Every story is a wave. It rises, breaks, and becomes the sea again. So too are we. If you Watwald, above them, lightning flickered over a distant horizon. The sound reached even to the deep, a faint echo of Zeus's old dominion." Poseidon smiled faintly. "He still likes to remind them who he is," he murmured. "Even gods grow lonely." A school of silverfish passed, shimmering like fallen stars. Triton's horn sounded faintly through the corridors, mournful but proud. The god of the sea closed his eyes, feeling the vibration of the ocean against his skin. "It is enough," he whispered. "We have shaped their world. Let them believe they shape it now." But the sea itself did not forget. The currents still carried his memory. When tempests roared, his trident's pulse could still be felt in the heart of the storm. When the moon drew the tide to shore, it obeyed the rhythm he had set long before mortals were born. He was not gone. He had simply withdrawn into the quiet vastness from which all things come. Philosophers replaced faith with reason. Sailors studied the stars and the winds, charting courses not through prayer, but through geometry. They still poured libations before a voyage, but more out of habit than belief. The world was becoming louder, more certain of its own power, and yet, in that certainty, lonelier. Zeus too felt the change. Olympus, once bright with immortal laughter, had grown subdued. The feasts were fewer. The halls echoed with memories. The mortals had inherited the surface, yes, but the deep remained his, untouched and eternal. In that truth lay comfort, and so the god who once shook the earth grew still. He no longer needed worship. His temples were the reefs, his hymns the whale's low song, his altar the endless horizon. The sea itself was his body, his memory, his dream. When the final storms of the world come, when the mountains sink and the stars fade, he will rise again, not in wrath but in renewal. For even when the last breath of mankind has vanished, the ocean will remain, rolling as it always has, reflecting the heavens that no longer hold gods. And within it, forever unseen yet forever present, the spirit of Poseidon will endure the pulse of eternity, the calm after all tempests. Eternal tide. There comes a point when even the gods no longer measure time, when centuries wash together like ripples meeting in the dark. In this endless hush, Poseidon waited not as conqueror, not as ruler, but as memory itself. The world above had forgotten his temples, yet the sea still breathed his rhythm. The tides continued their eternal heartbeat, rising and falling like the slow inhale of a sleeping god. And though mankind had ceased to kneel upon the cliffs or whisper his name before voyages, they still built their lives beside the ocean. They still gazed across its surface and felt the quiet pull of awe and dread. In every harbour, in every child staring at the horizon, Poseidon lived on. He had simply changed form. No longer a deity of thunder and trident, he had become something deeper, the essence of wonder itself. He watched them from his palace beneath the waves. Around him, light filtered through miles of shifting blue. Forests of coral rose like cathedrals, and great whales drifted past, their songs trembling through the water. He no longer wore a crown of gold, but of quiet, his power diffused into every current. Every grain of sand stirred by the tide. Amphitrite, ageless and serene, sat beside him. "The mortals do not know you," she said softly. "They name their storms after numbers now. Their ships sail by machines, not prayers." Poseidon's eyes gleamed with distant light. "They do not need to know me by name," he replied. "They know the feeling. That is enough." He rose and extended his hand. Philosophers replaced faith with reason. Sailors studied the stars and the winds, charting courses not through prayer, but through geometry. They still poured libations before a voyage, but more out of habit than belief. The world was becoming louder, more certain of its own power. And yet, in that certainty, lonelier. Zeus too felt the change. Olympus, once bright with immortal laughter, had grown subdued. The feasts were fewer. The halls echoed with memories. As long as the wind pressed upon the waves, his pulse continued. He turned his gaze upward, toward the dim surface, where the sunlight wavered like breath. He could see the shadows of ships passing, their hulls slicing his realm. He could hear the low hum of engines and the faint murmur of voices drifting downward. And he felt, faintly, the echo of something sacred in them, not worship, but wonder. Sometimes, in the still hour before dawn, a sailor alone on watch would hear a sound beneath the waves, a deep, resonant hum, like a heartbeat made of water. The sea would glow faintly blue, though no moon shone. In that moment, even unbelievers would bow their heads, not knowing why. It was instinct, older than faith, older than words, reverence for something greater than themselves. Poseidon watched them from below, unseen. His gaze was calm, no longer burdened by pride or rivalry. A new island born from the heart of an earthquake, a whale breaching where no one expected life. He was still speaking, but only those who listened with the old reverence could hear. In the centuries of silence that followed, his image continued to appear not in temples, but in art, in poetry, in dreams. Artists painted him not as a god of wrath, but as the embodiment of nature's soul, wild, beautiful, untamable. His trident became a symbol of the ocean's eternal power, a shape carved into the hearts of explorers and poets who sought to understand what lay beyond the horizon. Scholars studying the depths spoke of the ocean as if it were alive. They described its currents as circulation, its storms as breath, its depths as thought. Without realizing it, they described Poseidon, a being whose essence had become indistinguishable from the living world. He was no longer an individual spirit, but the ocean itself, the eternal movement of creation. When the last of Olympus faded entirely and the stars grew strange above the earth, Poseidon remained. The moon still tugged at his waters, the sun still gilded his surface, and the earth still trembled to his pulse. Humanity rose and fell like the tides, but the sea continued. Sometimes, in moments of great peril or beauty, mortals still glimpsed him. A fisherman lost at sea saw a shadow beside his boat, vast but comforting, guiding him toward shore. A diver in the deep swore she saw a figure watching from the darkness, eyes as calm as eternity. Sailors spoke of lights beneath the waves, not lightning, but the glow of a god moving unseen through his ancient halls. He was no longer a being of fury, but of reflection. His storms, though fierce, no longer punished. They cleansed. His earthquakes did not destroy without purpose. They shaped the world anew. In Poseidon's stillness lay the truth of all life, that creation and destruction are the same act seen from different shores. And so, the god who had once raised mountains from the sea now rested beneath them. The ocean was his prayer, the horizon his temple, the wind his hymn. Children on beaches built towers of sand, shaping miniature worlds before the surf reclaimed them. Lovers walked beside the sea, tracing hearts in wet earth. Sailors stared into the darkness beneath their vessels and imagined eyes staring back. They feared and loved the water, never truly understanding why. Poseidon smiled. "They do not forget," he murmured. "They remember differently." Sometimes he sent signs, not as warnings, but as reminders. A calm sea after a terrible storm. His essence lingers not in myth, but in sensation, in salt air, in rhythm, in the infinite conversation between water and world. When mortals sleep, their dreams often return to the sea. Some find themselves walking along beaches that shimmer with moonlight. Others drift in deep blue water without drowning. They wake with the scent of salt in their lungs and tears they cannot explain. These are his gifts, the reminders that eternity is not lost, only transformed. In the far future, when even the continents shift and the oceans reshape the face of the earth, Poseidon will still be there. The mountains will crumble, the cities will sink, but the tides will rise again. Perhaps new beings will walk the shores, then not human, but curious, drawn once more to the water's whisper, and in their wonder, they will give it names anew, and among those names, one will echo faintly through the deep: Poseidon. He will never demand worship again. He has no need for sacrifice, no hunger for glory. He has become the very element of endurance, the memory of all that was and all that will be. In his final thought, if gods may think of endings, Poseidon understood the beauty of impermanence. To flow, to change, to return, that is the law of sea and soul alike. The wave rises, shines, and falls, yet the ocean remains. So too do the stories. So too does he. Far above, the moon drifts across the dark sky, silvering the surface of the water. The tide sighs, pulling back from the shore before surging forward once more. In that endless rhythm, the god's voice still speaks, not in thunder, but in calm. It whispers through every foam-tipped crest. I am the beginning and the returning. I am the silence between waves. I am the heart that never stops beating. And quoted. And if one listens closely, standing by the sea at dusk, they may hear that voice and feel, for a fleeting moment, that the divine was never gone. It only changed its shape to endure forever. Word count, 2,200. Wind down, 300 words. And so, as the sea settles beneath the evening stars, the story of Poseidon fades into quiet. The waves, which once shook empires and carried the cries of heroes, now murmur softly against the shore. Their rhythm is steady, timeless, a lullaby for a restless world. You can imagine standing there now, at the edge of that eternal ocean. The air is cool against your skin, touched by salt and mist. Each wave arrives, curls and dissolves, tracing silver ribbons across the sand before retreating once more. The sound is gentle, hypnotic, as though the sea itself is breathing in sleep. In the distance, the horizon glows faintly. It is neither dawn nor dusk, but something beyond both the hour when gods dream and mortals rest. Somewhere beneath those endless waters, Poseidon dreams too, content at last. His kingdom no longer needs dominion. It needs only peace. You close your eyes and let the hum of the tide wash through you. The ocean's heartbeat aligns with your own. For a moment, you feel what the ancients must have felt when they whispered his name, that sense of belonging to something greater, something infinite and kind. The waves continue their song, soft and unending.